This is Atomic Shinobi and today I'm going to narrate first part of What If Naruto Was Trained by Hiruzen and Jiraiya. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. No wasting no time, let's start the story.
He let out an irritated sigh. The elderly man's gaze swept across the tiny clearing. He finally fixed his gaze on one of the few people he would be seeing for the next 5 miles. Or at least that's what he sincerely hoped. However, given his luck, it was probably not going to be. At the very least, someone else would soon learn about it. This isn't possible. Not right now, not with everything going on. But honestly, he couldn't point the finger at anyone but himself. He was aware that this day would arrive. And the consequences could only be attributed to his own fault. At least things wouldn't be as difficult if he had spoken to the boy beforehand. He would have to explain a lot, though, as it was. So what do we do? The elderly village chief did not respond orally. Rather, he started to approach the blonde boy, easily sidestepping the glistening spires. It was truly an amazing sight. Rainbow-colored, towering spears had ripped through the earth. In their reflection, the fading sunlight dances. Sarutobi would always remember that moment. Now, however, he was unable to pause and gaze. Too little time and too much work. This won't turn out good, sensei, no matter how much we try to hide it. As he got closer to the defeated genin, Sarutobi snorted, "Don't you think I know that? But it can't be helped at this point." The Sannin's Jiraiya shifted uneasily. He paused as something occurred to him. "I don't think anyone else was around when it happened. But we have to assume that others know. Does anyone else know?" Sarutobi leaned down and moved his hand to check the boy's pulse before responding, "My former teammates. And a few more trustworthy Anbu who reported it originally. I can trust them well enough to keep it a secret considering they've done it up to this point." He grinned. "Why do you think those two put up with Naruto's foolishness for so long?" The Sannin scowled. "I would have thought those two the worst to know. How did you keep them under control?" The elderly Hokage scowled at his longtime student as he turned his head. "Contrary to your belief, Jiraiya, my teammates are not heartless monsters. They only do what they think is best for the village. The same can be said for Danzo. They understand that the burden Naruto bears is large enough as it is. Putting him in the spotlight or breeding programs would have caused unwanted questions, and it wouldn't be long before that information spreads out to other villages. What do you think would have happened then?" The Sannin scowled more deeply. There was no need for him to think. They would, of course, start to pry, which would bring them to the information Konoha wished to conceal the most. They would all be untangled eventually. It would be easy enough to remove Naruto as the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. They would then ask him about his origins, which would land him in serious trouble with lightning and earth. He would be desired by all. However, assassination and kidnapping would be the only options. He wouldn't even think about betraying Konoha because he would be too loyal. Overall, it wouldn't be attractive. A Sannin asked, "What are we going to do?" At a loss, of course. "A seal?" Sarutobi hurriedly said, "No," and got up. "I've already sealed him once." This ability surfaced earlier in his life, when he was emotionally distressed. He doesn't remember, far too young, but I don't want to even begin to think of doing it to him again. Besides, we can't if he was supposedly screaming bloody murder. Jiraiya started to argue, "Why didn't you say something to me before? Why would you keep something like that under wraps for so long?" With his back still turned, he smoked his freshly lit pipe and said, "For the same reason I kept the Kyuubi a secret, to keep him safe." The Sannin opened his mouth to speak, then shut it again. There was nothing wrong with that. Naruto required as much protection as possible. Well, there are some positives. When he first showed this talent, it had been more than surprising to say the least. The last I believed to have it was Kushina's grandfather. He was ancient when I saw him. But I do have a good idea of some of the techniques he used. Saw a few of them. It is really useful. It would most certainly be one of the more powerful ones had it been more constant. Sarutobi gave an involuntary nod. Jiraiya frowned and began, "If anything, this will help him greatly if he can keep it under wraps enough. But this is Naruto we talking about. In the meantime, it changes things quite a bit. His chakra's violent reaction has opened up a new can of worms, to say the least. And it completely changes the way I had planned to do things. I'll train him." Jiraiya blinked, startled. The words had been delivered so swiftly and yet so firmly. He needed to confirm that he heard correctly when he said, "I'm sorry. Come again, sensei?" At last, Sarutobi turned to his old pupil, conviction-filled eyes. "For too long I've held Naruto back from his potential. Held him from the truth. Not anymore. I am getting old, Jiraiya. I am no longer a cage in terms of strength. But I am a teacher. You a primary example." He released the pipe from his mouth. So here's what we'll do. I'll take over his training for the exam. There's still a month and a half left to teach him from here on out. You, and my teammates, will help. He will be the future protector of Konoha just as he always wanted. Just like his father wanted. Jiraiya's expression darkened. What are you talking about, sensei? You have a village to run. Once more, the elderly Hokage shook his head. Not anymore. My time is almost done. I have only a few years left. If worst comes to worst, Kakashi can take over for me. But for right now, while I have the chance and the ability to still move, I want to begin to train my successor. Just like my sensei did for me. Jiraiya questioned incredulously, your successor? Do you really believe he can do it? The Hokage gave a snort. You've known him for 2 weeks now. Do you doubt? The Sannin was unable to respond to this. The boy had a lot of talent, but he was also a little rough around the edges. Despite his lack of basic knowledge, he made up for it with his unpredictability and unwavering willpower. To be sure, the boy had a natural talent. It was the experience and expertise he required. It will take time, maybe more than I have left, but I will at least see him on his way. You have seen the amount of potential he has. He needs no kekkei genkei or biju. His determination and drive alone can push him to the top. Jiraiya grinned. Another pause. He's a lot like her in that way. Does he know of her? Sarutobi shook his head instantly. No, too young to remember her. Another grave mistake of mine. But again for his protection. Just think of the fallout around the village if they found out he was related to the killer of our last daimyo. Once more. There is no need to think. He would have been skinned alive by them. Another knock. Kid is going to flip. Correct. Which is why you have to place an overlapping seal in place. It's actually already done. I wanted him to grow first on his own power. This came about because the seal I placed limited the Kyuubi's chakra and forced his out more. Then I taught him water walking. He got it. His chakra control when the seal is released will be great improved. From there I moved to work on his natures. That's when it happened. The Hokage put his pipe away. I suppose that's when things went south per se. Of course. Wind, earth, and water. The Hokage raised an eyebrow in real surprise and said, 3? 3? He had 3. However, he thought he was alone. All the other shinobi he had encountered had no more than 2. However, it did make sense. However, there would be no reason to believe that Naruto would stop now if he possessed the talent he had anticipated. And you're worried if he has the potential. The protest from Jiraiya was, didn't say that. I question his maturity. The Hokage started to weave around the crystals once more as he retreated to the Sannin. Which will come in time. I will make sure of it. After all, you were a handful as well. His chakra is spent. Which means he'll be out until tomorrow at least. We have to move quickly to turn this in our favor. I'm going to take Naruto with me and find my teammates. You get rid of the evidence. If you know how. Yes. I saw it. Lighting, wind, and fire nature chakra can tear them down if I hit them hard enough. Or I can just use the pure chakra nature of the Rasengan to break them apart. Good. I'll inform them of the plan and then I'll tell him. From there it's up to me to work at him. I'll start with working on jutsu befitting his nature. You'll work on what techniques you do know regarding this release. They will be impersonating me to keep everything as quiet as it can be. Alright then. This is going to be tricky to pull off. Yes. But not impossible. Hurry now. Yes, sensei. Shit. The hiss of words was accompanied by a smile. In an effort to exert pressure and stop the blood flow, his left hand extended and firmly grasped his right wrist. His thumb was gone. His ringer finger was skewed sideways, and his middle finger was broken in 2 places. The hand is now in ruins. For anyone, it would have been a severe injury that could have ended their career. That applies to everyone but him. It was one of the few benefits he received from his unusual circumstances. He leaned his back against a free tree and fell back onto his behind, his teeth snapping together. He closed his eyes and made himself focus on something other than the agony that was currently tearing through his arm. In actuality, it was his own fault. For what reason did he exert such intense pressure? Ultimately, he had no real desire to pursue a career as a shinobi. Why did he feel the need to push himself to such extremes? Particularly since he was aware that it would only result in further failure. Naruto, that's the only way you'll ever receive any answers. The smile wavered for a fraction of a second before breaking completely. A sigh of pain ran through his body, however, it wasn't physical. It was insane. Sentimental. 12-year-old Naruto was so sick of life in general. He had enjoyed believing that he was a decent person with high morals. He disliked hurting other people. Furthermore, he didn't believe that his goals and dreams were amusing. Or he didn't used to, anyway. However, now. Was Kami giggling at him at the moment? Was his entire life a farce? Is it just a huge sitcom? It must have been. It was the only reason he could come up with. But there's no point in feeling sorry for yourself. He had discovered long ago that crying would not solve your problems. Or not for him, anyway. His issues could not be resolved, merely enhancing them. You are a truly pitiful person, aren't you? A sour smile appeared at the idea. His hand hurt, but it was a dull ache now. By tomorrow, it would be fully recovered. If the sudden tummy ache was any indication, the fox demon had promised that as soon as the injury had happened. An unintended consequence of the Toad Sonin's seal work had been an increase in the amount of chakra that the seal allowed to pass through. But he couldn't hold the man responsible. Because of his former traitor teammate, he was attempting to help stop something terrible from happening. Still, was it really that bad? Leaning his head back against the tree bark and closing his eyes, he found himself wondering, is this where it ends? Dissipate. Why do you do this to yourself? The village's training grounds, concealed among the leaves, were special in their design. Although they were typically varied, the terrain was appropriate for all training sources. Because of this, when people were looking for a place to train, they almost never went too far from the village center. Sadly for Sarutobi Hiruzen, however, the boy he had followed this far wasn't like most people. And so, on this cold autumn evening, he found himself far from home. His aged, weary eyes gazed at the figure of the young child seated before him. His normally godlike stamina reserves were weakened by the physical exercises, as evidenced by his slight chest heaving. One eye opened and gave the short man a thoughtful glance before closing again. The boy leaned back and fell to the ground, giving the Hokage a devilish smile. Why not push myself? Should I really be concerned? Hiruzen, a Sarutobi, scowled, unable to completely stop the jolt of irritation that shot through his body at the noncommittal reply. However, he was unable to dispute its veracity. Both doing so and becoming upset about it were pointless. Even irrational. From the moment he opened his mouth to ask the question, he should have anticipated that precise answer. Do you hate me, Naruto? I'm nearly overflowing with hatred. Even though the words had been spoken softly, Sarutobi jumped in surprise. He looked at the blonde who was lying in front of him. Every letter was filled with emotion that poured from the blonde into him. Deep inside his pores and permeating every part of his body. That same feeling was almost palpable in his veins. Just as quietly, Naruto added, not with someone or something in particular though. And most certainly not at myself. Not anymore at least. But rather with the whole of our existence. It was impossible for the Sandaime Hokage to resist taking a deep puff from his pipe. A response that indicated how comfortable he was. A small tick that was detrimental to ninjas. One that only appeared in the vicinity of this boy. In an unconscious effort to protect himself from the unexpected cold, he drew his ceremonial robes closer to his body. Even though there was no wind. He whispered around his pipe, I see. Even though it was unable to see the elderly man standing close to the base of the feet, one blue eye opened again. The blonde made a sound of disapproval as the other joined it. The boy countered, no, I don't think you do. In fact, I know you don't. This isn't just a great disgust or high dislike for life in general. No, this is full-blown hatred. I hate this existence. Or rather the lack of my own. The way the world seems to disregard me entirely. This is a legitimate hatred. Sarutobi was unable to react to this. He closed his eyes, trying to get rid of the headache that was starting to develop. He let out a long, weary sigh. One of sympathy for the boy who was lying in front of him. This child in particular did not deserve to be so exhausted. To feel so exhausted and old even though he was so young. However, he would never display it out of concern that the boy would misinterpret it. Naruto was too powerful for sympathy. Much more powerful than he ever could be. He pulled his pipe away from his lips and said, let me ask you something, Naruto. He hesitated until he was certain he had the boy's full focus. Do you hate some more than others? The individual snorted. Of course I do. Or I be nothing more than a damn monster like they always said I was. Unable to determine what exactly started this cycle. What a sad thing that would be. A cracked grin. At that point I'd just be giving in to them, huh? A monster. A product of my environment. I never want that damn thing to happen. Sarutobi gave a nod. And who in particular do you hate more? Do you honestly need me to answer that question? No, obviously not. Since I am already aware. Naruto started by saying, I'm sure you never wished you were just an orphan. But then again, I don't know your situation growing up. I promise it's nothing like yours. But I do. I wish it all the time now. I would rather have all my family dead. Or have all my family be ignorant of my life. Hell, I think I'd be better off just wondering. But to have family and for them to not even look at you. for them to treat you like these other ignorant people. Sarutobi fought the impulse to object to that, to state that he had faith in him, because he couldn't honestly say that he never considered Naruto being anything different from what the Yondaime Hokage had stated. Not without showing them both disdain. And for that, he had grown to respect them both too much. His mind echoed with words that this very boy had said what seemed like ages ago, shedding fresh light on the boy's innate wisdom. There's no worse pain in the world than to have something for the first time in your life, only for it to be let go. And then finding out that you have family out there, just as you always wanted, but for them to not even acknowledge your existence. Sarutobi had only ever thought of Naruto as broken once. To his credit, however, the boy had simply continued. Long ago, he would have undoubtedly failed. Suddenly, the boy was moving. He pushed himself into a half flip by pulling his legs up until his knees touched his chest, then sliding his hands back behind his head. He turned away from the elderly Hokage and caught himself on his feet. As the blonde brushed off his orange jumpsuit, Sarutobi turned his head to the sky. A farce. Bright colors were not worn by good ninja. Legends were the only ones who did. If you're competent enough to murder me, then whatever. He was aware that this symbol would eventually be used everywhere. See ya around, old man. Got a lot to do tomorrow. Sarutobi looked off into the night sky and nodded in agreement. On this specific training ground, the moon always seemed to shine brighter for some reason, resembling a large diamond in the sky. And as it reflected off her eyes, he could recall in his mind's eye. He turned to the blonde and said, "Hey, old man." Despite stopping his movement, Naruto did not look him in the eye. "Do you think it's okay to want to die?" He showed no signs of being upset or taken aback by the question. Rather, he took another drag from his pipe. "Yes. No one should ever wish for death, and for doing so they're a coward. No one ever has an excuse for it." A feeble smile. "Except you, Naruto." It was clear to him that the boy wanted to hear that. "You really are a dumb ass, huh?" The blonde boy lifted one eye up the tree after cracking it open. Talk about the devil. He was looking down at the self-described super pervert, a toad Sani. "I'm not happy." Naruto seemed to have lost the ability to care about whatever it was. "You're better than this, kid." He let out a snort that he was powerless to stop. "How would you know? We've only just met, right?" The boy could almost hear the disappointment in the man's voice as he said, "I've seen enough in these 2 weeks. I've seen what you've been like before, kid. And this isn't you. Or at least it didn't used to be." He didn't give a damn. The opinion of the elderly ninja was irrelevant. He had had enough of seeking other people's approval. With a frown, Jiraiya accepted his silence and silently fell to the ground in front of him. Naruto gave him a one-eyed stare for a moment before shutting it once more, appreciating the little silence. Unfortunately, it wasn't long enough for him. Naruto responded to his statement with a snort of disbelief. "Look, kid. I can understand where you're coming from. I'll never fully comprehend, but I can gain a good view. But I'll be damned if I let you sit around and wallow in your sorrow. Your father wouldn't like for you to." "I don't give a damn." The words had been so venomous that he was shocked himself, and they had been a near shout. Jiraiya recoiled at the unexpected explosion and took a physical step back. He glared at him, then let out a sigh and closed his eyes. "I don't give a damn about him, or what he wanted. I don't give a damn about anyone else. Just like they don't about me. I'm tired of being the good guy. I'm tired of always being the cheerful idiot. I'm tired of being too obtuse to see past what's really happening. Tired of acting like I don't understand. I'm done with it. Don't speak to me about him or his family. Or the woman who gave birth to me. And most certainly don't speak to me, Abu." He almost choked on the emotion when the words got stuck in his throat. He bowed his head to the floor, concealing his eyes behind his bangs. He refused to cry. No longer. He was finished. "I'm over my sadness. I'm done being joyful. I'm over my anger." Jiraiya, however, wasn't. "Look, kid. I don't know what to say, but I know you shouldn't be mopping around like this. You haven't been to training in days." Naruto mumbled, "And I don't plan to go. I'm done with being a ninja." Jiraiya snorted. "After all the talk about trying to be Hokage? That's crap because you want to be out here training right now. You said you want to be a legend. What's changed now?" "That was before your old teammate showed me how useless it all was. No matter what I do, those people will never respect me. Not even my own blood does." The old shinobi was overcome with rage, and he was powerless to stop the snarl from tearing through his mouth. His expression grew thoughtful as he said, "Then make them respect you. Make me respect you, because I've lost it all. Show everyone you aren't one to be trifled with. Show them by proving them wrong. They deemed you as insignificant. A useless tool. People have used you up and thrown you away before. Now it's your turn for payback. Getting even. The blonde did look up at this, looking at Jiraiya doubtfully. Forgive me for finding it hard to figure out what you're talking about. Like you haven't thought about it. A deal then? You get off your ass. Train hard. Get strong like we both know you can, and not with the fox demon. I mean on your own strength. If you're strong enough you can make it on your own. And in return I'll put everything else into second place to concentrate on finding the answers you seek. I'll find everyone that made you feel this way. And then you can beat the answers out of them. It'll be my top priority. Even over what the Hokage wants me to look for. The skepticism had now given way to outright incredulity. The convenience was too great, too simple. And what do you want in return? I just get the satisfaction of seeing their faces when they realize how wrong they've been. Do you really think I can? Of course. The real question you need to ask is to yourself. Are you willing to put in the effort to have what you want the most, to reach your goals? His objectives. Yes. Your objectives. Your new objectives. Is it something you truly desire? He didn't have to respond. Get up. The command in those two words was so strong that the body was compelled to obey. Or at least make an effort. Regretfully, Naruto's body was now essentially exhausted. After about a minute more, he was able to push himself to his feet, swaying briefly as he struggled for balance. The elderly Hokage scowled at the screen but did nothing to assist the young child. When he had been offered the chance to rest, he had decided to go on. The boy's attempt to work himself into the ground was his own fault. Then he added, that was a pathetic attempt. If anything, your technique regressed with that last one. Naruto shrugged and smiled feebly. Unacceptable, try it again. The boy was trying to get as much air into his lungs as he could after 3 hand seals. He concentrated his gradually waning chakra on the air sacs and then ejected them as fast as he could. Fuden. Renkuden. As the ball of condensed air burst from the boy's mouth, the Hokage looked on indifferently. It struck the wood after firing in the direction of one of the training posts along the projected line. He watched with grim satisfaction as the ninjutsu's force reduced the wooden post to half a sawdust cloud. For now, it's acceptable. Wearing his own battle uniform for the occasion, the Hokage remarked, that was the best one so far. It didn't lose form until it reached the target and did a suitable amount of damage. No response came from the blonde. His hands were on his knees as he fought to get the necessary air back into his lungs after he had pushed it out. It will take time to manage the ninjutsu without adverse side effects like the one you're experiencing. But it also comes with extra benefits, such as expanded lungs. If anything, the human body underuses its potential. We don't use all our brain power and limit our physical abilities. Examples of this are seen under times of pressure. You do things that you were never before capable of because of the force of your will. You make your body step up to the challenge, and because of it your abilities rise to the occasion. This is the idea behind the gates. Once more, Naruto remained silent. He just put his hands on his hips and stood back up, nodding his head. To be honest, the Hokage was astonished by the boy's level of attentiveness. One of two things was what he had anticipated. The first was that Naruto was the typical squirmy, hyperactive young man that people had grown accustomed to, unwilling to sit and listen to instructions. The second, which was believed to be more likely, was a grumpy and irritable boy who, furious at the betrayal that had been placed upon him, only did what was required with little to no genuine effort. He was pleasantly surprised to get neither. Rather, he encountered a boy who gave his all in everything, who took in all he wanted to say and practiced it for his subsequent attempt. A boy who readily concealed the theory and facts he was referring to. To tell the truth was a little scary. Had he been this way all along? Had he disregarded him like everyone else, the one who said he only wanted the best for him? The response was painful because it was clear, he had. Additionally, he had depicted Naruto as someone who would struggle in his role as a ninja. Not because of the boy's behavior. However, this was due to his initial assumption that the boy's potential was merely average. Looking back, that had been a dumb move. The Yondaime Hokage had only one child. He was born to be great. He was born with potential and power. How often had someone simply sat down and started working with him? How many times had someone set aside their preconceptions long enough to provide him with individualized instruction, just as they probably did for everyone else? Had Kakashi even thought about working one-on-one with Naruto, as he had hurried to do with Sasuke? Obviously not. Naruto had been unable to develop as a result. Mountains of unrealized potential. Not anymore. Can you go again? He nodded and started sealing with a clap of his hands. Even if Sarutobi wanted to, he couldn't stop the smile from sliding into place. What I want you to do is very difficult. Naruto listened with a frown. He took a deep breath as he gasped for air following yet another exhausting training session. Leaning comfortably against a nearby tree, the elderly Hokage watched his newest student. They had started training 2 weeks prior, and Sarutobi was more than a little impressed. The boy had never done well in school and had a hard time following verbal instructions. However, things began to creep in at a startling rate when you actually demonstrated movement and examples to him. The boy's brain opened up like a flower's petals after Sarutobi discovered that he was more of a kinesthetic learner. The man soon realized that showing the boy how to do something was preferable to lecturing him about it. It was operating flawlessly. As Jiraiya no doubt told you, jutsu can usually be broken down into 2 different types of techniques: nature manipulation and shape manipulation. One uses pure chakra and the other changes chakra to match a certain element type. As he followed the elderly shinobi, the blonde remarked, like fire and water ninjutsu, and things like kawamari fall under the manipulation category. Sarutobi gave a nod. Correct, he had clearly been paying attention. His greatest issue. In order to make or truly master a ninjutsu, you need to have at least a deep understanding in one of the 2 categories, if not both. Jutsu that use them together are usually the most powerful types that fall under at least the B rank category. A strong example of this is the water dragon jutsu, which uses nature manipulation to mass together a great deal of water and then shape manipulation to form the dragon it is named for. As he continued what he had been saying, the genin nodded. Now that he had started to explain it using the Hokage's terminology rather than the intricate ideas that Amino Uruka favored, it made sense. Taking his traditional pipe from wherever he kept it, Sarutobi reached into his white robes and said, "With that being said, I'll take the idea of nature manipulation a bit deeper. I want to explain the idea behind elemental techniques, of which most are blood inheritance." As his thoughts merged onto the path the Sandaime Hokage must have been traveling, the blonde sat up a little straighter. Excitement began to surge through him, and he balled his right hand into a fist. What had always been denied to him was about to start. If Sarutobi was aware of his abrupt shift in demeanor, he remained silent while using a delicate fire chakra manipulation to calmly light his pipe. After inhaling deeply and enjoying the sweet, smoky taste of his tobacco, he took his pipe away and let out a slow exhale. As the smoke cleared, he said slowly, "Some bloodline limits are actually not restricted to blood lineage. In reality, they simply need the right combination of chakra elements and the skill needed to combine them equal in order to produce the needed results. With that being said, they are usually restricted to families due to the chakra combinations being similar. From there it takes simply the proper training from older and more experienced members, who of course would not share the secrets with those who aren't of the blood." The young shinobi paid close attention to his teacher without saying anything. Those techniques are usually called kekkei genkei, the same as actual physical abolites such as the Hyuga's Byukugen or the Uchiha's Sharingan. However, there is something even more rare and in most cases more devastating. Here, he stopped and got up from where he was leaning against the tree to walk a short distance to the genin. He stopped just in front of the blonde and put his pipe back in his mouth, taking another deep breath. As I just said, an elemental kekkei genkei or bloodline limit uses 2 elements that are combined equally to create a completely new element. What many don't know is that there are an even more powerful combination of elemental chakra that requires at least 3 different elements. He took a moment to digest that. This sort of combination is known as a kekkei tota or bloodline selection. As he processed what the man had been saying, the genin blinked in surprise. For a moment, he remembered the battle in Wave Country and the tactics the young boy who had taught him so much had taught him. It was precisely what his opponent had told him just before he died. The Hokage guessed correctly, saying, "By now you're probably considering your mission to Wave Country. And if not, that is the example I will use. According to the report, you became friends with a young boy who turned out to be one of your enemies. Now, apart from the fact that you should be more careful about who you speak to, I want to talk about his unique ninjutsu." Naruto stated, "The ice techniques. He mentioned everything you're saying. I just didn't understand it like now." Sarutobi took another drag from his pipe and nodded. "The Yuki clan used to indeed reside in water country," he went on. "They were experts in water and, as you might expect, ice ninjutsu. Before the great shinobi villages, when clans engaged in ceaseless conflict, the Yuki clan possessed a whole area close to swamp country, where they took advantage of the natural moisture. As a result, they had decades to hone their skills. That is an elemental kekkei genkei, for instance. Experience has shown you that it is incredibly strong and adaptable. The secrets are therefore jealously guarded. That's why the report about the boy you met was so unexpected. Throughout my years as the Hokage, I had very little direct interaction with Yuki clan members, but I had never heard of an ice-based method that produced mirrors. I'd wager that he personally created that technique under Momochi Zabuza's guidance. For someone his age to have used it with such a devastating effect meant that he had to have practiced extensively with it. With that line of thought, I can come to the conclusion that the boy created the ninjutsu quite a while before you ever encountered him. Years perhaps. For him to only have been a year or so older than you speaks volumes about his natural talent. Naruto listened and nodded slowly. It did, in fact, reveal a great deal about the type of shinobi Haku was. Without a doubt, the boy would have been greeted as another clan genius here in the village. Perhaps even more so than the Hyuga boy or Sasuke. Despite his talent, he passed away very quickly when it mattered most. That way of thinking was somber. He was not nearly as talented. Now, with that being said, I want for you to understand the difference in ability between an elemental kekkei genkei and an elemental kekkei tota. The Hokage went on. First and foremost are the rarity. As I said before, kekkei tota are mostly unknown. The largest reason for that are the lack of them in our world. Apart from the ice ability you came across, I can tell you off the top of my head around 5 other elemental kekkei genkei, with the first 2 coming to mind being the scorch element made famous in Suna and the wood manipulation that my sensei became renowned for before he took on the mantle of the first Hokage. The boy was frozen in place when the Hokage took out his pipe and gave him a fierce look. I can, in all my years as a shinobi, only tell you of one ability that officially counts as a kekkei tota. And the only 2 people who have ever shown the ability both became Tsuchikage. As he absorbed and processed the words, the blonde blinked. To put it mildly, it was mind-blowing to realize that Haku's demonstrated abilities were still far below their potential. How strong the boy had been. High Chunin level with ease. His own generosity was the only true weakness he had displayed. And it said volumes about the strength of his blood ability, even though he was the personal pupil of a well-known A-ranked Chunin who specialized in assassinations and stealth. The Hokage was informing him, however, that during his 70 years of shinobi practice, he had discovered a technique that was not only more uncommon but also far more potent, to the extent that only 2 individuals with S-class strength were able to use it. Despite his many facets and lack of intelligence, Naruto wasn't a total moron. It helped illustrate how far he had to go, and the battle between Kakashi and Zabuza would never be fully forgotten. However, he was aware from his brief, less than 5-minute fight in the second part of the test that Kakashi and Orochimaru were far apart. It was amazing to think that one additional component could make the difference between High Chunin and Kage. The Jinten or Dust Release was first used by the Nidaime Tsuchikage. Mew had been known as the Null Man for his stealth capabilities. But even more devastating were his ninjutsu techniques based around the Jinten element. With this power he could destroy entire armies and crush his enemies at their most basic levels. In addition, his mastery over his ability even allowed him to fly for a period of time and lift objects well over 100 times his own weight. Naruto listened intently and swallowed. The methods described by the Sandaime Hokage appeared to be unthinkable. Even though ninjutsu and the ninja arts were incredible, Naruto never believed that anything like this could possibly happen. The Hokage grinned as something went by in his eyes. That man passed the techniques on to his prized pupil, a distant nephew, who also shared the same 3 chakra natures he did. The battles I waged against the man who became Sandaime Tsuchikage were ground-shaking. And the more I think about it, the more sure I am that we, along with Aime's leader in Hanzo, have to be of a dying breed. From a time where the world around us was much more wild. To get his thoughts straight, the elderly shinobi shook his head. He wouldn't benefit from going down memory lane at this time. Now, as I said, the Dust Release is the only official example I have of a kekkei tota. But for quite some time I have come to the conclusion that 2 other special elementals combinations could also require 3 natures. One is the magnet release of the now dead Sandaime Kage, who used his special chakra nature to combine shreds of iron powder used for smithing into something monstrous. He stopped and looked the child in the gaze. The second is the crystal release. When Naruto realized what the old man had been hinting at, he froze. The unique talent that, up until now, he had reportedly only been able to use accidentally. All of this was brought on by a chakra-based ninjutsu that left him feeling as though his insides were being torn apart. The thought that he had a unique talent was incredibly thrilling, but the memory of the suffering was horrifying. The Hokage remarked, "The ability you've shown twice now," he hesitated a moment before revealing the truth, "was only seen by one other person in my time. A man known as Shinto. Uzumaki Shinto. The man who would have been your great-grandfather." When the boy heard the words, his heart almost stopped. Another chapter in his past came to light. More evidence that the name Uzumaki did have some significance, even in spite of what everyone had previously said about him. When I first meet that man, he was far along in his life, but like the Uzumaki clan had always been, he was full of vigor and healthy beyond what those his age should be. He sparred once with my sensei, the Shotomi Hokage, as an example to us of the younger generation about how far we had to go. He was grinning here. Maybe if he had been 20 years younger, my supposedly unbeatable sensei would have lost. Looking up at the sky above them, he focused. The stars would soon start to peek at them from the night sky as the sunlight had started to fail them. Even after so much time spent training, it was still insufficient. This day would not soon come to an end. He returned his focus to the genin sitting on the ground in front of him and said, "Your test with the chakra paper yesterday confirmed my long-held suspicion. You have an advantage that most people never have, let alone most ninja under Chunin. Your chakra is far more developed than anyone else your age. Perhaps this is an effect of the Kyuubi or something to do with your status as a member of the Uzumaki. Or perhaps you were just as special as you've always claimed to be. I intend for you to use that." He had a lot of questions and things he wanted answered, but he had learned that there was a time and place for that, and now was not that time. Naruto just nodded as he started to stand up. His breathing had long since calmed down, and he had retained everything the man had told him. "We don't have the time to teach you how to properly manipulate elemental nature, so we'll get started right away," Sarutobi said. "It takes decades for that to happen. But since you've already used this ability twice without any training, your body has the chakra memory needed to use it, and the requirements for at least early usage are low." Naruto rolled his shoulders and inhaled deeply again before nodding. "All right." As he guided his newest pupil along the path to mastering his distinct elemental chakra, the Hokage said, "Now we must first begin on the basic applications of each three natures." As the cold touched his skin, the genin let out a slow exhale. His breath compressed the air before him, giving him goosebumps. For what must have been the 10th time that night, he stood shirtless in awe of the Sandaime Hokage's creation. He had no idea how much more brilliant the man was. It said volumes about the man's abilities that he was able to solidify an entire lake in mid-spring with a simple chakra manipulation. It also made him realize how far he would need to go. "Pay attention." As his blue eyes scanned his naked surroundings, the blonde scolded himself. He was wearing basic shorts and no shirt as he stood atop the man-made ice ring. This specific exercise had straightforward guidelines. Avoid becoming unconscious. Because of the icy footing, he had to constantly control the flow of chakra to his feet in order to maintain his stability. In an effort to prevent himself from freezing, he was also supposed to maintain a gentle flow of chakra from the pores on his upper body. The Sandaime had introduced a more complex form of chakra training the previous day. The Hokage quickly dragged him from the water's surface after he perfected the water walking exercise to the point where he could fight for extended periods of time while standing, and then he used a single ninjutsu to freeze it to the ground. The boy listened intently to what the elderly man had to say as he watched in wonder. You can never predict the environment you will be deployed in or the difficulties you may encounter there. Therefore, you should always make an effort to be as ready as you can be for everything. The elderly shinobi continued by telling him about the various long-term assignments he had accepted as a young man and the various settings in which he had been placed during times of conflict. He continued by saying that allowing the scent of a swamp to divert your attention could be the difference between life and death. Or even worse, winning and losing a war. After completing his ninjutsu, the man had remarked, "You never know what to truly expect, Naruto. As you rise in rank and reputation, you'll be allotted missions that offer both a higher pay raise and a higher level of danger. From that point on, the intelligence we give you can only take you so far. A number of things can change or go overlooked. Or perhaps your client will even flat out lie to you. I think you know exactly what I mean." Yes, he did. He also listened to those words. The old Hokage threw everything at him in the same way. He actually grew to appreciate the old leader's teaching style the more time he spent with him. He had never experienced anything like it before. There was a tinge of, "This is why this happens," mixed in with sink and swim. Using tangible and visual examples, explain cause and effect. For him, it worked. It was also evident. Naruto relished training for the first time in a long time. He took pleasure in discovering more about the ninja world. Rather than following the routine, he awoke each day excited to get started and went to bed at night feeling both exhausted and content. He absorbed everything he could as quickly as possible because he knew it couldn't go on forever. 2 weeks remained until the test. He was ready to give them something of value. His sensitive ears picked up the faint shuffle of the wind. Before the shuriken even got to where he was, the boy had been moving for a while. He concentrated all of his senses on the environment around him as he glided across the ice in a controlled manner. Reaching out to the world around him, the chakra on his skin rippled and tingled. A week earlier, they had discovered that he was a little talented as a sensor. They were unsure if it originated from blood or the Nine Tails, but it was still helpful and gave Naruto something else to concentrate on during his training. Another way to improve his abilities. Although he didn't know much about it at the moment, he knew enough to guide him in determining the chakra's path as it approached him. Similar to the flow beneath his feet in the ice. The blonde transferred his chakra through his soles and into the icy ice beneath him using a control he had not previously had. Before he could jump back, he stopped instantly. The meaty fist tore from in front of him at the ideal moment. As the summon completely emerged from the water, he halted and jumped sideways, then charged directly at him. He had quickly learned to appreciate the Sarutobi head's contract's strength. They were nimble and powerful in ways that humans could never match. Their tails served as extra limbs, and their immense strength allowed them to be excellent taijutsu fighters. He had learned that fact the hard way. The block appeared in an almost textbook illustration of what the Hokage had demonstrated to him. Firm and rigid, it accomplished its goal by stopping the haymaker just inches before it reached his face. The slightly taller animal started to press its attack, and he quickly backed off. As his opponent for the day attempted to teach him taijutsu the hard way, the fist flew, the feet flailed, and the tail twirled. In response, the boy quickly demonstrated what he had learned. Despite his struggles, the blonde managed to keep up with his attacker despite block after block and strike after strike. Ordinary people could hardly see, much less follow, the flurry of motion as the two danced across the lake's frozen surface. Before launching his own right sweeping punch at the ribs, Naruto ducked low beneath a hook. The monkey was given the opportunity to lean forward and quickly knee toward the exposed side that the overextension had created after it was slapped aside. The blonde was prepared for that. He shifted his footing, slid his body to the other side, and brought the same arm into a returning back fist by lightly applying his chakra in a circular motion. Leaning its head back with its legs still outstretched, it evaded the blow thanks to the summon's quick twitch fibers. As it fell backward, it used its right hand to catch itself and its left leg to change the attempted knee into a front kick. The genin was knocked off his feet by the blow that hit home, but he was still able to control himself enough to keep from falling backward. As the attack went on, his chakra automatically restored his footing, and he forced himself to breathe. He moved his base to avoid each kick and raised his arms to defend each punch. He had never been very good at taijutsu. This could now be considered a contributing factor to his inadequate education. However, he now believed that he could at least defeat the majority of Chunin, and in the near future, he would not face anyone as powerful or swift as the Sandaime. At this stage, he might not be able to defeat the Hyuga genius in a direct physical battle, but at least he wouldn't lose the first few hits. Enough. At the command, the two fighters immediately separated. The genin paused to catch his breath, heaving and huffing. With his arms clasped behind his back, the Hokage strode out onto the ice and approached them with composure. After examining the two of them separately, he nodded, seemingly finding something he liked. He smoked his tobacco merrily and said, "Very good, both of you. It seems as if you've actually got a workout from this Sanji." Sanji, the monkey, nodded in agreement as he also took a moment to orient himself. The genin felt a surge of pride as he recognized that he was the one responsible for that. He had barely managed to last a full minute before being knocked down the week before their first spar. He was almost at a standstill now. The monkey nodded before bowing to them both and dispelling the phrase, "Thank you for your help, and please send Enma my thanks as well." Sarutobi waited for the smoke to subside before concentrating all of his attention on the blonde. "That was excellent work today. You've come a long way in your taijutsu in such a short time." He offered praise, and it was accurate. He was increasingly impressed by the genin's ability to learn. It is imperative that you keep your taijutsu training up. Many young shinobi overlook it for the flashy abilities of ninjutsu when it can be the difference between life and death. Obviously, to be a Hokage you have to have some proficiency in each of the three main phases, but the best thing to do is to become well-rounded enough. The genin scowled. One of the few things he remembered from the academy was, "I thought working on too many skills was a bad thing." Slowly, the Hokage nodded. Yes, and no, most shinobi have neither the talent or the patience needed to completely round themselves. And it can be a bad thing to be a jack of all trades. But at the same time it can successfully cover weaknesses. You don't have that kind of excuse. You have the talent. Sarutobi responded. Naruto rolled his shoulders and nodded. "So what's next?" The Hokage said, "Next we'll begin summoning. I have a surprise for you, for all your hard work." The blonde gave a small smile, but he suppressed it. He went on, "What I have in mind for you is both beyond useful and beyond dangerous for you. Years ago in my occupation as a Chunin I came across a fierce competitor from the now destroyed Hot Springs village. This man used an unusual sort of summoning, and after his defeat I came across his scroll." "Strange?" asked the blonde. The Hokage grinned at the genin and said, strange in the abilities it showed. Abilities you'll have to learn yourself. Summoning contracts are rare and valuable village resources. Konoha has the most at a total of 10 in mass circulation. In order to sign a contract, one must go through a long and extensive process that isn't even available until you reach special Chunin levels. Of course, there are some special cases in which these things can be circumvented. This is one of those such cases. With optimism, the blonde said, I can use this summon? The Hokage gave a nod. Naruto. You can have the scroll if you can convince them to take you in. We've got a problem. The Hokage halted in the middle of his stride and turned to face his former pupil in the corridor. Jiraiya. You've returned already? The Sannin remained silent. His face was filled with the solemn conviction that he displayed only in the most dire situations. Taking note of this, the village chief headed back to the office he hadn't been to in more than a month. This had to be significant if the Sannin was present at this time. He walked inside after opening the door. A copy of him, startled, looking up. With a nod, the individual was replaced by an elderly woman who got up from the chair. With haste, the Sannin entered the door and leaned against it. Are we clear? The old woman exchanged a glance with him and stepped out from behind the big desk, saying, Yes. What's going on? Sarutobi replied, It appears that we have a serious issue. I'll leave it to you to relay it to Hamaru. Jiraiya? If you remember, I said something not too long ago about checking up on Uchiha Itachi. After exchanging glances, the two village elders nodded. Then I sent a report noting a possible connection between him and Orochimaru. Yes, said the stern voice of the ancient fire shadow. Anxiety is beginning to creep up. What is it? The Sannin stopped here and glanced between the two, saying, I found that connection. And it's not good. It appears that a few years back, before Orochimaru became leader of Sound, the two had been allies in an organization of some sort. A high-class organization. What sort of organization? The kind that spells bad news for not only Konoha but the entire ninja world. Apparently it was a group of 10 with a very specific membership requirement. You had to be a missing.nin. S-class and wanted for some kind of heinous crime around the shinobi world. The thoughts that were flooding their minds. It was even noted again by the Sannin who was reporting it. The bad kind of fuckers that you didn't want to mess with unless you had no other choice. Kaharu scowled. Her eyes were filled with worry. This does not bode well. Any idea as to what they were doing? Jiraiya replied, Oh yes. I have an idea, and then inhaled deeply. Apparently they were focusing on kidnapping. Or more specifically grabbing a certain group of people. He glanced quickly at the mountain monument and the large bay window. The Jinchuriki. They're hunting them. In shock, Sarutobi could not resist taking a deep breath. His expression was one of disbelief. His former teammate echoed this response. Jiraiya went on, For what I don't know, but it can be safe to say it's not good. And from what I gathered, Orochimaru rebelled and went into hiding from them after he attempted to harvest Itachi's eyes. To which he was promptly beaten and tossed aside by our young mass murderer. Do you have any idea who else is included in the group? No, the Akatsuki, their name, is very closely guarded, and I had to hide this informant for fear of his safety. But he did give me one piece of information. A measure of how dangerous they can be. What is it? He asked, lowering himself into his chair. You remember the civil war in Kiri, correct? Kaharu chose a seat in front of the desk and asked, How can we not? The bloodline limit purges. The Hokage went on to say, rather insane, blaming all the bloodline clans for their problems in wars. I've got some really chilling info that the Akatsuki had something to do with it. Rumor was that the last Mizukage was the Sanbi Jinchuriki. And that after he was defeated it was unmasked that someone wearing a black cloak with red clouds had been using a jutsu to influence him for years. The calling card of the Akatsuki. There was a tense silence in the room. With a heavy sigh, the elderly Hokage sank into his chair and clasped his hands beneath his chin. He rested his head and tired eyes, trying to keep the flood of thoughts under control. He took a seat in the same chair that had witnessed numerous such incidents in the past. His village is experiencing yet another crisis, his house. We have to tell Naruto. Kaharu scowled. What? He looked up into her eyes and said again, We have to tell Naruto. Let him know of their presence and what they're after. Put him on alert for anything too suspicious. The woman objected, Is that wise? I just don't seem to believe Uzumaki can handle it. Jiraiya intervened, saying, I agree with Sensei on this. He'll find out sooner or later. But at least this way he'll have time to prepare himself. It involves him directly and in turn affects the village as a whole. He at the very least deserves to know. If only to keep his faith in the village. I suppose so. Hiruzen went on, It makes perfect sense. I'll leave it to you to tell him, Jiraiya. Understood. I was planning on seeking him out after this, only 2 days left. Meanwhile, we'll be working to make a contingency plan for defending the village. Kaharu scowled further. You expect them soon? No, or at least I hope that isn't the case. Rather, this is a precaution for the finals. The Sannin finally moved away from the door and asked, the finals? Do you anticipate something happening? The Hokage regarded him drably. Do you honestly not? You know Orochimaru as well as I do. He wouldn't have come out of hiding just to mark young Sasuke. He wants something more out of all this. The only question is what? Out of all the Uchiha left in the village, why do you think he chose Sasuke? Because of his potential? His connection to Itachi? No, I believe the answer is far too visible to look that deep. Kaharu gave a head nod. She let out a deep sigh and said, for the simple fact that he has chosen the path of revenge. It would be easiest to tempt him with the promise of power. What he can't obtain easily here in Konoha. Of all the Uchiha left, Sasuke is the most emotionally and mentally unstable. Others might have dreams of revenge, but only he actively lets it rule his life. For that we have to keep a close eye on him, especially considering his disposition towards Naruto. Seeing someone he previously disregarded improve so drastically in such a small amount of time could invoke him into a fit of rage. And then I could easily see him falling into Orochimaru's trap. Listening to the sweet whispers of power. It couldn't be something that we could put off though. Naruto needed the training. And this new development only makes it a more pressing matter. Kaharu looked curiously at her former teammate and said, Hiruzen, do you honestly believe Uzumaki has improved that much in such a short time? To be stronger than Sasuke? That isn't something I can say at this point without having an idea about how well Kakashi has trained him. With the Sharingan he has the potential for drastic improvement, but I do believe that Naruto has the ability to win this exam and show the skills necessary for Chunin promotion. To be honest, I was at a loss for how much potential Naruto showed himself. He shows a surprising grasp when words are put into the right terms. And his physical abilities were quite impressive to start. And the Kyuubi? Jiraiya interrupted and said, not a problem. Before we even began I put a seal on him to limit the Kyuubi's influence on him. I wanted to teach him how to manage his own power before delving into that of the fox demon. And at first it seemed like a good idea. We were working on nature manipulation when his kekkei Genkei resurfaced. Questioningly, nature manipulation? A genin? The Sannin gave a shrug. He was doing fairly well. Obviously I hadn't expected for him to gain complete control. But I wanted enough for him to manage higher level ninjutsu. I started with wind, being his primary nature, and figured with his massive chakra reserves he could use wind ninjutsu for mass area damage where he could not counter with inferior skill. Keep the Hyuga boy from using taijutsu. Seeing that they were now describing Naruto's training, Hiruzen continued, I continued on that base. Earth and wind natures are around a good level. He still needs a lot of work if he ever wants to get to the elite level, but for now he's well beyond genin. It's more than a little unfair at how quickly he's progressed considering he's the only one capable of using the Kage Bushin technique to its full potential. Add to it his work with his kekkei tota, speed training, minor taijutsu adjustments, and summoning. He can summon? Jiraiya questioned with genuine surprise, and Kaharu echoed her expression. What is it? I had hoped he would continue the tradition and summon toads. Sarutobi shook his head and interrupted. No, he refused to accept that, so I offered him an alternative. Do you recall Kaharu? The scroll that our young team discovered? Those strange violent beasts? She scowled. Did they accept him? Yes, said the Hokage, nodding. Despite my initial reluctance, I insisted on staying with him for security. However, he is said to have impressed them greatly in the end. Is it reasonable to assume that he is more than prepared for the test? Yes. This implies that we have one less issue to handle, at least for the time being. And in light of that, we must act right away. I'll be depending on you, Jiraiya, to keep an eye on Naruto going forward. Ensure that he is ready for this Akatsuki. Jiraiya nodded and said, okay, and as for Orochimaru? Hiruzen interrupted, saying, don't worry about that. We'll take care of that. If I am inclined towards something else, I only ask that you protect the village and its residents in the event of an emergency. Are you certain? Ikuta? No, I don't want to worry you any more than I have, he said, smiling slightly at his former pupil. Just what I've asked. All right, the Sannin said, scowling before caving in and opening the door. Then I'll be on my way. Before the test, see how the child is doing. Excellent. Jiraiya, goodbye. See ya, sensei. Before addressing the other person in the room, the Hokage waited until he was certain that his former pupil had left. All right. You and Hamaru will be needed, the second stage. A change in concept. Everyone was ready to attend the final round of the Chunin exams, which were scheduled to begin that afternoon, and travelers from all over the world had marched upon the village, concealed by the leaves, in anticipation of this one day. A festival had begun around the village, and thousands of people gathered in groups to watch the young future of the various shinobi villages. Various bets were placed on the results of the exams, and nobles from different settlements flocked to be wined and dined. Away from all of this, Naruto sat by himself at his favorite ramen stand, tracing the crowd with his eyes before turning to face his ramen. This was the day he had been looking forward to, the day he had worked so hard to get to, the day he would actually start his journey, and he would make sure the village knew his name. Then the entire world. His gaze went up to two of the few people in the whole village who had earned his respect. They had always been kind to him despite the trouble it caused them, and seeing his favorite ramen place packed with patrons made him smile, something he rarely does. But now everything would be different. Looking around the crowded area, Naruto thought, there's no point in staying here any longer. These people have come for a show, after all. He gestured to the ramen stand server with his hand, saying, thanks for the meal, Ayame. Before placing another piece of paper on top of the stack of Ryo, which was much more than was required, he called. That will put them in a great position, he thought as he started to leave the stand, 100 to 1 odds. The blonde then proceeded to the recently constructed Colosseum. The roaring crowd exceeded his expectations by a significant margin. Thousands upon thousands of civilians, shinobi, and potential customers had already crowded the stands in anticipation of the event, creating a sea of people so large that the blonde didn't even bother to guess how many were there. The Hokage decided to go deeper into the meaning of the Chunin exam during the break, explaining that while its goal of fostering unity was important, it was ultimately just a front. Clients used their battles to gauge the value of the next generation and to determine where to place their stock for the future. Poor performances could mean the difference between a boom and a bust for each ninja's respective village, something that Suna had apparently already been feeling. Because of this, the Kekkei children were even permitted to compete in the first place. As the village's first family hidden in the sand, they were supposed to symbolize that, even though the village had fallen on hard times, it still had plenty of talent at its highest levels. The fact that all three of the sand ninja who took the exam advanced to the final round would help to support this idea. It was until the home crowd knocked them out, anyway. Hi, Naruto. Why is the new look so popular? He was unsure of how he felt about his fellow Leaf Genin. Unlike most, they had known him from the time spent in the academy together, and did nothing more than annoy him. The more he thought about it, the more upset he became. He had always been treated unfairly by those around him and had mostly grown accustomed to it, but it still irritated him to have all of his attempts at friendship rejected or ridiculed. Naruto looked down the line to his right where the young heir of the Nara clan looked over him. The blonde scowled but offered no further response. The other Leaf Genin wanted to pretend they were quite good friends now? Kakashi and Sasuke were destined to be together, and Naruto didn't respond verbally, instead turning to face the crowd in front of them once more with the intention of ignoring the question. His Genin teammate was absent, and the young ninja wondered for a moment if it was the result of his former Junin sensei. The heir to the Nara clan shook his head at the impolite dismissal and took another look at the blonde Genin, who was now wearing loose fitting black pants with two small orange stripes down the side, strapped to both legs, wearing the standard shinobi pouch with a stock of kunai for the left and shuriken for the right, a short, sleeved orange shirt that barely reached his biceps, a black vest that zipped up to the middle of his chest, bandages from just below the elbow up to the tips of his fingers, fingerless gloves covering each hand, while the meta plating beneath the knuckles protected the back. His hair had grown a little, and now the bangs fell in his eyes, slightly obscuring them, and, for some reason, the blonde had started wearing a bright and offensive orange cloak to cover it all. Nevertheless, if the blonde Genin believed that the change in uniform would aid him in his battle against the Hyuga prodigy, he was in for a rude awakening. He now appeared to be a true shinobi, or as much as one who was obsessed with the color orange could be. It's unlikely. The Nara heir pondered for a moment before snorting. Perhaps getting his face punched in again will finally teach him some respect. The examiner declared, everyone except Uzumaki Naruto and Hyuga Neji must leave the staging ground. Naruto noticed for a moment that the man was entirely different from who he had been, but he didn't give it any thought as the genin surrounding him left. Follow me, Uzumaki. Everyone enjoyed a good fight, especially ninja fights, and the proctor led the genin a good distance away from his motionless opponent before letting him turn around again. The two genin faced each other as the examiner spoke to the roaring crowd. The Hyuga prodigy smirked superiorly, as he always did, and glared at the smaller genin before snorting, "You can forget now and save yourself some humiliation." The young Hyuga did not seem to mind his lack of response, and if anything, the smirk seemed to grow brooder. The blonde genin frowned and opened his mouth to respond before stopping himself. He was already allowing his opponent to get under his skin, as the Hokage had warned him that if he allowed himself to be subjected to his enemy's taunts, he had already lost the battle between the minds. Good. He said once more. You are totally confident in your abilities. It will make it even more enjoyable to crush you. Once more, he was met with silence. One could use a knife to sever the silence that separated the two. As the crowd roared around them, anticipating the first fight, the exam proctor, chewing this senbon, looked between the two young shinobi, his eyes darting from the favored to the underdog. Despite everything he had been told about the two competitors thus far, he could not get rid of the feeling that this would be a battle that would be discussed for a long time in the village. Are you both prepared? Both the rookie genin and the Hyuga nodded. He swept the air with his right hand. Hajime. By the time the proctor had finished moving his arm, the blonde was in motion. The right hand reached down and flicked free 5 shuriken after a quick hop back to increase the distance, and then a half. Second later the two hands were together and the 5 metal stars had grown to 50. This was the first improvement the Hyuga prodigy noticed. He bit his bottom lip as his Byakugan. Enhanced vision caught the glints of fire attached to the end of each metal star. Exploding tags. The Hyuga tensed as the usual veins around the side of his face bulged open. Shish. T. The young shinobi used his hand to spin in a full circle, the only surefire method he knew of to avoid the approaching death trap. Kaden. Heavenly spin. Across. Shaped seal later, 2 shadow clones appeared around him before they darted off towards the fading cloud of smoke. The blonde narrowed his eyes in surprise as the dome of solid chakra took shape around his opponent. The shuriken exploded on contact, and a great wave of fire so intense that he could feel the flames prickling his skin blossomed open. The genin wasted no time in preparing his next move. The other leaf shinobi started to make a row of seals even faster than he had before, but a pair of shuriken cut them both down in the middle as the Hyuga genin tore free of the destruction and charged across the ground hard and fast, trying to close the gap so he could attack the blonde in close quarters. His feet slid to a halt and kicked up dirt and gravel. Mazurapa is the suit, water trumpet, water release. In order to avoid the violent burst of water that tore across the distance between them, the Hyuga prodigy pulled his body into a tight spin to the right. He concentrated on his footwork and stopped facing his opponent once more, only to jerk back as a wave of orange obscured his immediate vision. The Hyuga prodigy gritted his teeth as he lashed his left foot out directly behind him, forcing the blonde to evade by quickly turning his body to the side and slapping it away with a palm. The older genin struck with a chakra. Coated palm strike, striking nothing but air as the younger genin body flickered past his defense. The blonde dropped his knee and leaned forward to reach past the Hyuga's guard, but the prodigy quickly took a step back before realizing he had been handed and hopped over the leg sweep the younger genin had set up. The Hyuga used the momentum to turn quickly to face his younger adversary and lashed out a front quick that was blocked by a raised knee. 2 hands came forward towards the chest in what would have been crushing blows, but strong blocks deflected them at the inner forearm. In order to stop the prodigy's drive short, the blonde leaned forward on both hands, then he lifted his lower body up and delivered a quick side kick. Then, he focused a burst of chakra down and out with enough force to launch him sideways into a roll. Then, as he quickly stood up to face his opponent, he leaned and knocked away another chakra infused blow with his right hand before delivering a front kick from his right foot. The Hyuga prodigy avoided that with a quick side step, moving to the outside and jabbed at the limb with 2 fingers. The 2 genin turned into a flurry of blocks and strikes as they attempted to land a solid blow, and the combined voices of the crowd rose to a frenzy as the young leaf ninja fought each other with all the ferocity of bitter enemies. To the people, it was an unexpectedly strong fight, but to the shinobi, it was something entirely different. 2 young ninja displayed skills that were mind-blowing when they considered their age and experience, and to the seasoned veterans, they saw 2 young ninja whose hand combat skills far outstripped anything more than 2/3 could have accomplished at the same point in their own personal development. The future lay out in front of them. Naruto cannot be that person. Looking down at the arena below them, the heiress of the Yamanaka clan yelled, "Tell me that's not Naruto." With her body motionless and her eyes wide with shock as she gazed down at the scene in front of her, Haruno Sakura opened her mouth to respond, but she snapped it shut. She wanted to say something, anything at all, but she was unable to do so because, in spite of her desire to be loyal to her teammate, there was only one way to do so. Uzumaki Naruto. Assure me it's not him. The blonde kunyachi had taken to gripping the metal railing in front of her to express her disbelief physically. That isn't Naruto. It is. The man next to her interrupted sharply, "That's him, okay." Inazuma Kiba's voice was serious and uncharacteristic, and the little puppy that was his partner curled up in his lap while it watched the match with its master. Only he could stand to wear that much orange. However, how in the hell did Naruto of all people become so good? The girl emphasized. "Oh, I don't know." The boy growled mockingly. "Perhaps through training." The statement was harsh but honest nonetheless. "I know if I were given 2 months to work with and heard everyone counting me out, you better believe I would do everything I could to show them wrong." As she watched her teammate spin around with the older genin, Haruno Sakura asked herself, but what kind of training could turn someone so helpless into something so fierce? She could hardly believe it herself, but here he was going blow for blow with an older and more experienced opponent. The short boy, who was more brawler than ninja, had managed to keep up with the best rookie from the previous year, a member of an honored clan who was specifically known for their skill in hand combat. And this one was regarded as their most talented member. What the devil was he doing? A feint with his right hand forced the blonde to guard, a mistake that the older genin took advantage of. With a simple change of footing, he reached out and further batted the arm apart. Inside his younger opponent's guard, Hyuga Neji snapped off 3 quick finger taps before he finally landed a fierce palm strike that sent the younger genin reeling back. The Hyuga prodigy sensed the opening before it even materialized. The shorter genin flew back with wide eyes as he hit the ground with a thud and rolled back feet overhead. The white-eyed prodigy bounded forward without missing a beat, then got up and delivered a side kick straight to his opponent's chest. The Hyuga, with his smirk restored, hurried forward once more and followed, determined to end the match. Only to tense up in shock when his opponent dissolved into a cloud of smoke in the middle of rolling. The long-haired genin slid to a stop and leaned back just enough so that the uppercut only snapped his teeth shut by brushing the edge of his chin, but he lost his balance and was unable to stop the flowing kick that slammed into his stomach with far more force than anything that blonde had displayed up to that point. The blonde exploded from the ground with the force of a breaching whale. Even without air in his lungs, the Hyuga genin lashed out, turning his body sideways and throwing a quick kick that caught the turning blonde in his side. The older leaf genin felt the air forced from his lungs as he was sent jolting backwards by the strike, falling on his back and sliding for half a second before experience forced him to roll his body to the right in order to avoid the knee drop that landed where he had just been. The blonde saw no other way to put distance between them, so he took a chance and turned his body to the right, grunting as 2 strikes slammed into his shoulder as he hopped to escape the onslaught. Although he could feel the area start to numb immediately, the maneuver paid off as he pulled free 3 shuriken to cover his tracks. Naruto grunted as he hit the ground before he rolled with the momentum and forced his way onto his feet. Neji was on him the next second. The younger genin was crouching in front of him with one hand on the ground when the Hyuga prodigy slammed to a stop after juggling to the side as the stars flashed toward him. After almost 10 seconds of silence, the younger genin's expression darkened. "I would like to ask you a question before we proceed," he said. "What the devil are you dealing with?" The branch family member's brow furrowed after he blinked a little in surprise, his right hand twitched in frustration, and the veins around his eyes pulsed with annoyance as he processed the words. "My agreement? You want to know what my deal is?" was said in a dead and hollow voice. The blonde scowled. "I do, damn it. What made you leave like that earlier? What has she done to you before?" The elder genin interrupted. "Hyuga Hinata is a failure." His white eyes fixed the younger genin to the spot, saying, "Right now, in their graves, our ancestors laugh at the idea alone that someone like her would take on the title of clan head." "A failure?" Neji stood calmly to full height and crossed his arms, nodding as Naruto echoed in shock. "That's right. Our clan's heiress from birth, she is frequently made fun of. The life of a ninja and the horrors it can bring are not for her. She detests causing pain of any kind and is extremely shy. She lacks the willpower to defeat the clan's adversaries." As the Hyuga prodigy said, some people weren't made for the terrible nature of the ninja life, but even so, who was he to tell someone what they could and couldn't do? Naruto's thoughts traveled back to Wave Country and the good-hearted young man who had saved Sasuke's life only to die himself. He was particularly enraged by this type of person. According to the elder genin, the Hyuga clan is proud. "Our lineage dates back to before the shinobi arts were invented. On the outside, we are noble, but on the inside, we are warriors. As part of the Leaf Village's shinobi corps, we have proudly served it for generations. And yet our family's heir is incapable of even defeating her younger sister, who is 4 years her junior. In our opinion, this is unacceptable. And you have the right to disparage her because of that?" As the crowd above them grew restless due to the pause in action, Naruto challenged, "That gives you the right to step on her dreams?" Dreams. The elder genin sneered. That's what Hyuga Hinata's dreams are. It is impossible to accomplish them. She is the type of person who wants everyone to live in harmony in every small way. Conflict of any kind bothers her. In her dreams, we sing about kindness and happiness while holding hands from Kumo to Kiri. He shook his head and laughed ominously. It's not a dream. That is a delusion. The level of animosity and hatred among the populace is too high for her preferences. Even in this village, there are long-standing animosities that will never be resolved. Something she will never comprehend. Something she won't even attempt to see. Trying to control his temper, he closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. What about my agreement? I have a personal grudge against my younger cousin as well as every member of the main branch family. My problem is that I have no control over my own life. My fate has already been decided, so that's my deal. Your fate has been chosen for you? The blonde asked, his eyes narrowing in bewilderment. Neji opened his eyes and said, yes. And what about the rest of the branch members? His hands had started to rise up to his face. To live and die as slaves of the main branch because of the Juin Jutsu placed upon our foreheads. He had heard from the Hokage about the terrible treatment of the Hyuga clan branch members and the origins of that seal. So Naruto remained silent as the older genin reached back and untied his forehead protector, causing his eyes to instantly focus on the array that was visible across his forehead. My destiny has already been written with this seal on my forehead. His expression turned sour as he said, as my father did, I will die a slave to the main family, just as all branch members before me have. When they reached the crux of the issue, Naruto arched an eyebrow. Your father? Yes. For the benefit of the main branch, my father was killed. He took another deep breath to compose himself before continuing, saying, years ago, when I was still young, the Leaf Village held a festival designed around peace. He was sacrificed for a mistake he did not make. Additionally, a Kumo diplomat was the honored guest. A Chunin. Naruto recalled that the Hokage had been too preoccupied with the diplomat to visit him, but he had been unable to go because he was afraid of the public's reaction. It was absurd. It was a lie to allow Kumo to use another devious strategy, Neji stated. The man's sole purpose was to steal the Byakugan belonging to the Hyuga clan. He chose his target as a result. Hinata, young lady. You can see that the attempt failed. Our clan head, her father, had found the kidnapper in his haste to flee. However, he quickly killed the man out of rage rather than apprehending him. An error that led to a political catastrophe. The older boy didn't seem as much of an asshole as he had initially believed, and the blonde could already see where this was going and didn't like it. It was a long-standing grudge that he acknowledged had some merit. Naturally, Kumo denied any involvement and instead made war threats. Giving them the life of the man who had murdered their diplomat was the only way to please them. However, that was not feasible. It was unreasonable to expect the head of the main family to accept responsibility for his error. Therefore, they sent a decoy in his place instead. He had a twin brother. My father, he said with a snarl that made it obvious what he thought, and Naruto could not hold him responsible. My father had to pass away because Sama was unable to control his temper. I detest that. But I do understand it. The genin's hands were now balled into fists. But to witness my younger cousin behaving in such a manner, feeble, powerless, worthless? The Hyuga prodigy appeared to have heard Naruto's quiet remark, I makes you feel as if your father's sacrifice was in vain. He shook his head once more, causing his long hair to sway in time with the action. Much more. To become the kind of shinobi my father would be proud of, I've been training daily. Even though the main branch aims to conceal the resources from us, I've discovered that I can maneuver like the heavenly spin on my own. Every challenge I've been given, I've mastered. Nevertheless, I will never receive the respect I am due, no matter how far I go. As Naruto eyed his opponent, he thought, he's furious. I can't say I blame him. At one point, he would have stopped the older genin there and screamed at him, saying things like he was selfish or a fool, that he didn't believe in fate, and that he would do everything in his power to change his perspective as well. He would have also made promises about what he would have done if he had been given the position of Hokage, including making sure the branch Hyuga were free. He simply didn't care now. Reaching up to his forehead protector, Neji added, I don't know if the clan head, my uncle, even cares that my father died. I used to think that he did, and I was very guilty about it. However, we'll probably never find out. And instead, I have to see the person my father gave his life for repeatedly fail every day. He tightened the garments before lowering himself back into his position. That's what my deal is. As Haruno Sakura moved to another seat on her right to accommodate the newest member of their viewing group, she wondered, what's going on down there? The fact that the genin was moving at all was beyond amazing, and the willpower required to force his body to be here must have been staggering. Sakura understood why he would push himself, and even she knew how important it was for him to be here, so it was more than a little surprising when Rock Lee came down the stairs and asked for a seat. "Pardon me," said the brown-haired girl who had assisted him in descending the stairs, "but could you tell us what's happening now?" Sakura couldn't recall her name, but she knew her as Lee's teammate in the Hyuga Prodigy. Naturally, before she could even finish her response, the blonde next to her leaned forward and started to give an enthusiastic recap. It was odd, to say the least, that one moment they were entangled in a complicated series of taijutsu moves and the next they were calmly conversing with each other. Sakura scowled as he moved her head out of the way of flying limbs. Naruto usually only rushed his opponent and tried brute force. However, he was doing a lot of things that he didn't usually do. The heiress of the Yamanaka clan frowned and trailed off, and then they broke apart before they started talking. The brown-haired Kunichi's expression of disbelief was, to put it mildly, humorous. "I see." Rock Lee, on the other hand, was grinning broadly as he gazed down at the arena below them. "I was confident Naruto-kun could succeed." Cheering against his teammate felt a little inappropriate, but there was more at stake than just team pride. If anyone is a master of perseverance, it's him. His teammate scowled as she turned to face him and opened her mouth to speak, but the boy at the other end of the room interrupted. "They're starting over. I can respect that then," Naruto said, rolling his neck before nodding his head. "I had a slight curiosity." The blonde took a deep breath, knowing that the brief intermission was over. His curiosity had been satiated long enough. It was time to wrap this up. The older genin remained silent, just staring back at him with wide eyes. "Let's get started." The Hyuga Prodigy didn't even bother to match the charge, instead choosing to widen his base and flood his right arm with chakra as he prepared to reveal one of his new techniques. Neji took a deep breath, dipped his hips further, then took a hard step forward with his left foot and threw his right arm out towards the charging Naruto. The blonde clapped his hands together, ran through a series of seals, and then channeled chakra to the tips of his toes before pushing off. Hake Kusho, Air Palm, 8 Divination Sign. A seal. Less shadow clone appeared next to him as he slid to a stop, reaching out and grabbing him by the shoulders before heaving him aside with all its might. The wave of chakra destroyed the clone, and Naruto winced in midair as the memories rushed into his head. Unable to avoid inspiration in time, Naruto blanched as the wave of chakra rushed towards him across the space between them. The smug grin returned as the Hyuga spread his arms wide and knelt down in front of him, only to jerk back in surprise as the Hyuga Prodigy entered his space via Shushin. With 2 fingers extending from each fist and his Byakugan taking in the location of the blonde's Tenketsu, he declared, "You are within the range of my divination." What a waste. Hake Rokujuiensho, 60. 4 palms of the hand, the 8th divination sign. 2. As 2 fingers slammed into the blonde, Neji yelled. 4. Naruto snarled as the assault began in earnest. 8. 16. The Hyuga Prodigy turned his body to attack a different part of his body, but his hands were only blurs. 30.2. At this point, the Hyuga Prodigy had an epiphany and realized that something was seriously amiss. There are 60. 4. Before realizing that pain was starting to return to his own arms, he pushed and struck chakra at every point he saw, continuing his ferocious attack until his arms were only blurs. He finished by slamming a palm into the blonde's chest with the intention of throwing him away, only to realize with a startled gasp that his attack had been hitting something solid the entire time. Using his Byakugan-enhanced sight, he realized that none of the Tenketsu he had attacked had been closed. His eyes jerked up from the younger genin's chest. The blonde smirked haughtily. "Now, you're in the range of an ass whoppin'." The Hyuga Prodigy's next experience was entirely different. The blonde slapped his hands together in a ram seal, and his smirk grew. Neji was shocked to see black markings appear on his skin and then vanish entirely, taking a few steps back for distance as he tried to understand what had happened. He didn't make much progress. The blonde was in his space after one Shushin, and then he delivered a right swing that was much stronger and faster than anything he had ever delivered before. Neji was unable to deflect the blow with a slap of the opposite hand, but he was too slow to avoid the follow. Up knee to the side, and he gasped as pain immediately started to spread from the point of origin before the right fist returned and nailed him in the opposite side. The Hyuga Prodigy staggered back, using the strongest body flicker he could manage to put distance between them. It worked, or so he believed, until the blonde dropped to his knees instead of following and started flicking through hand seals faster than anything he had shown up to that point. Instincts hardened by training and experience started to kick in as he tried to escape the blonde's sudden assault, but it was all for nothing as he took another right to the stomach and a snap kick to the same abused side. Earth release. Earth-style wall, Doten, Doryu Heki. In mid. Shushin, Neji barely had time to stop himself from going splat and paid the price when the chakra he had expelled in the opposite direction slammed back into his own body. He winced and closed his eyes for a brief second as he tried to stop all his momentum. Neji's enhanced vision allowed him to see the large wall suddenly sprout up from the ground behind him. Naruto has more than enough time to finish his work. Byakugan active Neji saw the build up of chakra seconds before the jutsu took effect, and after 3 hand signs and a body flicker of his own, the blonde had already traveled half the distance between them before thrusting both of his hands with open palms at his opponent. Wind release. Gale wind palm, Fuden, Repusho. The Hyuga Genin's world twisted around him, and a throb of pain started in the back of his head. By sheer willpower alone, he was able to focus his vision enough to see what happened next. Neji was thrown back with tremendous force and uprooted from his feet before he was slammed into the wall. His body seized up, and the Genin coughed up a wad of blood as his midsection was abused. He slid down to his knees and fell on his hands. The 3 shadow clones moved with more of the same startling speed over the remaining distance between them. The older Genin sprang to his feet as quickly as he could and slashed out his left palm in a clumsy and pointless attempt to stop his assailants. The first clone to reach him slapped the hand down roughly as it flipped over him, and then, using chakra coating on its hands, it launched a mule kick in his back, sending him sprawling back down and onto the ground. There was no more struggle as the older Genin with wide eyes deactivated his bloodline limit before his head fell over in shame. A half-second later, the clone had jumped down and fallen on his back, while the other 2 slid to a stop on either side and grabbed each of his arms. Frustrated, Neji was powerless to stop the 3 clones as they each drew a kunai and placed the tips near his nude jugular. Someone had beaten him. From a distance, Naruto yelled, in the academy. My worst skill was the clone jutsu. I couldn't do it, so I failed 3 times. It's one of my best now, though, and I've decided to keep working rather than letting it dictate how I should live. He smirks and shakes his head. Nobody should be able to dictate to you what you can or cannot do or be. He looked at the amazed examiner who was standing off to the side. Well. The Chunin scoffed incredulously, shook his head, and glanced between them. Raising his hand to the sky, he turned to the throng and yelled the words the blonde had been longing to hear. A winner. Naruto Uzumaki. No ramen could ever compare to the roar of pure emotion that ensued. He prevailed. Incredulous, Yamanaka Ino's expressions echoed her shout. That fool truly prevailed. The proctor lowered the wall of earth that had erupted from the ground, and Haruno Sakura's eyes traced her own teammate's form as he walked over to the annoying orange cloak and reclaimed it as the medic loaded his older opponent onto a stretcher to take away. She sat in equal disbelief, looking down on the arena floor below them, the noise level around them preventing her thoughts from properly forming. What on earth did she just witness? The oddly dressed Genin on her left had gone giddy with delight as his brown-haired companion stared blankly at the battlefield while muttering something to herself. The brown-haired male Genin on her right had resorted to merely grinning and shaking his head while the puppy in his lap kept yipping and barking. Her brain was still refusing to cooperate. He won? Her ebullient, defenseless teammate won? Naturally, Naruto did. He defeated adversaries he had no right to challenge, he conquered obstacles he had no business attempting to overcome, he prevailed. Her face broke into a smile as the realization that he had prevailed seemed to sink in. And that was more than sufficient for today. Congrats, Naruto. Chapped lips gave way to a hard sigh. Now he had dropped the annoying orange cloak that had been draped over his forearm onto the stone floor. In an effort to quiet his pounding heart, Naruto closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. He leaned his head back and slumped against the wall. He was not particularly bothered by the concrete's coarse texture. In contrast to the sun's heat that had touched the back of his neck, the cool stone was a welcome contrast. Quite an impressive showing out there, kid. Naruto smiled without opening his eyes. Instead, he just turned his head to face the man, rolled it sideways, and leaned his cheek against the concrete wall. From the first landing, Jiraiya started down the stairs to the ground floor. He fixed his gaze on the boy leaning against the wall. There was a tiny gleam of surprise in his eyes. I had no idea that someone could learn so many techniques in such a short amount of time. Only a month and a half after all. Rolling his head back into alignment, Naruto shrugged. We cheated. Jiraiya halted 3 paces away from the boy. He looked at the genin in front of him, a puzzled frown on his face. Cheated? He had to inquire. How? My seals? With another sigh, Naruto stretched his arms above his head and said, growth hormones. proteins and the like. Also used my chakra to forcefully rebuild my muscles overnight to help recover from physical exertion. It's a counter to your seals that seemed to work rather well. He laughed. To be honest, we didn't come up with. He just noticed my muscle tone was seemingly getting larger by the day. I was always fresh for the next session, and so we put 2 and 2 together and got the Kyuubi. The Sannin asked, isn't that a little dangerous though? Jiraiya nodded, impressed but still perplexed. My seal's draining your chakra, then this drains your chakra, and your training. You would be wiped out every night. Naruto disagreed, saying, if I was a normal person. But I'm far from that, but I do sleep rather soundly at night. Still, with your exposure to the Kyuubi's chakra reserves rather limited right now. Don't worry. Naruto comforted them, it was a one-time thing due to the time restrictions. I won't need it anymore. From here on out I'll grow physically on my own power. Ah. Good to hear. And the ninjutsu? Naruto informed him that they were shadow clones. That took up the largest bulk of my chakra daily, to tell the truth. About 20 clones a day split up to working on 2 ninjutsu. Of course none of them are nowhere near the level of being mastered, but I'm farther along than most my age would be. First I got to an above average level of chakra element manipulation, first half of my main 3 really, and that helped out to learn the ninjutsu. From there it was just repetitive work to get it battle ready. To be honest, most of my time away from you was spent working on fixing my taijutsu and learning to keep track of faster opponents. That's how I was able to easily counter what he was doing when forced into taijutsu encounters. Your little seal trick also helped me to keep up physically and helped my speed and strength. All of this along with summoning technique you learned? Naruto opened his eyes this time. He turned his head back to face the Sannin. An eyebrow was raised. You know about that? Yep. His own smile appeared, trying to keep it a secret? Naruto said, I was. After all, it was you who forced the idea of keeping a few things out of the eye of the public. Of course I did. With his chest puffed out, he nodded as though he was wise. A famous ninja is a soon-to-be-dead ninja. People purposely develop counters for it. Like the Hyuga boy did for your shadow clone usage. Pretty nice no seal use by the way. Mostly only Chunin can pull that off. You've come a long way in a short time, shortcuts or not. What can I say? I had good teachers, according to Jiraiya, of course. Which reminds me. I'll be taking over your training after the tournament. Official transfer to me and all from Team 7. He shook his head and said, good. Was going to ask anyway. Speaking to the boisterous crowd back on the field. Can't deal with that drama holding me back anymore. You hear that now? What are the odds his match will be postponed for him where it wouldn't be for anyone else? He stopped here and turned back to the sun's slender light, saying, of course. What the people want they get on this particular occasion, despite if it's fair or not. And everyone was here to see the last Uchiha. The Kazekage especially. Which reminds me of something. Sensei told me to warn you to be on the lookout for anything suspicious involving Sand Ninja. When Naruto eventually got off the wall, he scowled. He did. Is something going to happen? Jiraiya gave a shrug. Don't know for sure, but I know he's got the Anbu and all Chunin level ninja on high alert. You're the only one under Chunin level he wants to let in on this. So just be ready for anything, and stick around the arena area. Astonished, Naruto blinked. He was honored to be informed of this. I'll do that. Does he expect something to come of it? He paused again as something occurred to him. Again, don't know for sure, but he did say for you specifically to watch after the Sand Jinchuriki. By the way, how is your Kekkei Genkai work coming along? Did you work on what I was talking about before? Naruto nodded while scowling. In what time I did before I turned in each night. Jiraiya inquired, how far along are you with those ninjutsu? All of a sudden, it was serious. Naruto was somewhat surprised by the abrupt shift in tension. I've got that little kunai and shuriken trick down well enough, but I need something to do it with. Replied Naruto. And I'm sure I can recreate a defensive wall ninjutsu with it if I absolutely had to. I've also got one little technique I can use to supplement my taijutsu in defense. He continued to grin. Should have seen the look on his face when he realized he wasn't actually getting through. Shattered the defense with the pure chakra strike, but it did its job enough to keep me from harm. The Sannin continued, how about changing physical matter? I've done a little work with water. It's the same as with the technique. I can do it but would rather not have to. But I'm sure I can in a dire circumstance. A smile appeared. I'm pretty good under pressure. Jiraiya also smiled, a sudden shift in attitude. A sigh of his own filled the air between them as he said, so I've noticed. He started to turn around and said, anyway, I've got something to check on. Remember to be ready for anything. With a half wave, A Jiraiya started up the stairs. Will do. What about you? He threw back over his shoulder and said, don't worry about me, kid. Just be ready. Naruto reached down for his cloak and shook his head. Right. Prepare yourself. But for what? Phase 3. Attack on the village of the Leaf. Leaning back in his chair and crossing his hands behind his head, Inazuma Kiba grinned and declared, he isn't coming. Sakura scowled as she turned around in her seat, which was now one level lower than his, but she remained silent. At this point, I'm thinking the same thing. Sasuke wasn't known for being late. As she peered over the guard railing in front of them and out onto the field below, Yamanaka Ino whispered, I wonder where he is. When a group from Wind Country had gone for refreshments and hadn't returned, they had seized the opportunity to advance. He wouldn't miss this unless he had no choice. Do you think something's wrong? Kiba went on, you mean with his ego? There was amusement in his voice. Nope. Just grew even bigger if possible. Sakura started to reprimand Kiba, but then she noticed something. Her expression brightened abruptly. Naruto, over here. Kiba turned toward the top of the stairs, as did many of the other fans who were seated nearby. Suddenly, the blonde from before was standing there. He leaned casually against the back wall to that level of seating and looked down at them. Sakura got up from her chair and grinned as she waved to her teammate. Down here. The blonde finally appeared to give in and leaned away from the wall after shifting his gaze to her exclusively and giving her a look. Descending the stairs gradually in order to reach their spot in the back row of this seating level. As he proceeded, he ignored the expressions of surprise or venom. When he finally got to their level, he glanced quickly around the group. Except for two he knew had been on Neji's team, the majority were from his school group. The female of the pair gazed at him with an unidentified but non-hostile expression. Sakura, he said, grinning a little. He was a little taken aback by his lack of enthusiasm for the opening. How have you been? Great, come sit down, he exclaimed, looking far more relieved than he had anticipated. Although he did sit in the farthest seat of the row, he arched an eyebrow at the exaggerated response. He looked down at the field where the examiner was announcing the schedule changes below them. I was correct. More partiality, he said breezily, so Sasuke hasn't shown yet. That actually doesn't surprise me. At his words, Sakura's excitement subsided a little. She was still only able to shake her head in disappointment, though. No, Naruto returned his focus to her and observed that she was annoyed by the reminder, but he made no attempt to retract it. He decided to pay more attention to the faces of the other people around them instead. Shoji, Lee, the girl he didn't know, Kiba, Ino, and Hinata. Shino and Shikamaru were probably in the preparation room. It appeared that everyone was present. Good, he would have everyone accounted for beforehand if something were to happen. Naruto asked the entire group, who's next then, if they're going to postpone Sasuke's match. Kiba retorted, Shino is supposed to fight that doll guy from Sand, but I think he quit out even before your match. Which in turn leaves Shikamaru against the girl with that other guy dead. Naruto said. A frown swept over his features. And he probably won't be up to fighting either. Which means it's right back again to Sasuke and Gaara. That is correct. Naruto began a little, but he calmly turned back to face the stairs. A man with black hair and a faint scar over his left eye, 2 seats up from Kiba's row, turned to face him. He seemed to be assessing Naruto. Which made him tense. Even though the man's attire and lack of markings revealed nothing, it was clear that he was a ninja from their village. The man continued, scanning the group of genin before turning back to the blonde boy. It all goes back to young Sasuke holding things up. Something that is most displeasing. He made eye contact with Naruto and paused before saying, but that isn't why I've come here. Uzumaki-san. I represent my clan who has wished to have a quick conversation with you. If you would. A clan? A glint of recognition appeared. His attire, and more significantly, his physical attributes. Dark eyes and dark hair. One of the last Uchiha was this man. Additionally, based on his age of only 20 or so, he was also young when Uchiha Itachi made his move and was therefore spared by the insane man. Why would he be searching for him, though? Naruto got up from his seat, tied his cloak around his neck, and nodded to the man in spite of the abrupt tense atmosphere that pervaded the group. As soon as possible, the Uchiha started to turn around and head back up the stairs. Naruto gave the group a comforting grin before pursuing the man. Let's examine the main points of this, Haruki. The old samurai looked to the side where the Fire Country daimyo sat as the crowd outside the press box started to argue angrily about the match's delay. The long-haired black leader of the country looked on. Even though he had always enjoyed the Chunin exams, he was unable to focus completely. He had other things on his mind now. It had to be a statement rather than a question. That was him. With his katana strapped to his side and wearing traditional samurai armor, Haruki nodded his head. Yes. The fox demon container. With that, the daimyo added, Minato's child. He looked for a flash of distinctive orange on the left side of the stands, where the boy had left the field. Indeed, sir. In private settings around the palace, the story had always been regarded as tragic. The firstborn son's lost child. In other words, it was more of the unwanted child than long lost. The boy was in Konoha, and everyone knew it. However, they were unaware of the reason he was detained there rather than with his family. They were unaware of his unacknowledged parentage and the burden he carried. Haruki had frequently pondered what the boy might have been like if he had actually survived the barrage of negativity that the village was certain to inflict upon him. He was clearly doing better than he was on his own. Indeed, he was a strong child, much like his father. The daimyo went on, he has grown up in an interesting way. I've heard rumors about his attitude. The trouble he gets into. Yet Sarutobi assured me in our meeting some weeks ago that he knew of the burden he bore. Tell me how someone can seem so happy and cheerful despite having everything against him. Haruki gave a shrug. I don't know, my lord. I myself would have went insane a long time ago. But ninja are masters of deception. Perhaps it is simply just a facade to hide his pain. A brilliant one at that. I wonder if he knows about his heritage. Haruki replied, I assume he would. The true question here was how he felt about it. I doubt Sarutobi would keep that sort of thing from him. It appeared that the daimyo agreed with this view. His recollections brought to mind his young nephew, who appeared to have inherited his son's unusually bright blonde hair. All he had left of his family was this. It was finally time to say, I wish to meet him after the exam. He had put it off for too long. Make it so for me. Haruki bowed. Certainly, my lord. It was truly amazing to see the stadium's opulent boxes. With the exception of the tiny viewing window between the room and the floor, they were totally cut off from everyone else. Naruto entered the room and started looking around. 3 individuals. 1 teenager and 2 adults. In addition, there were 2 Anbu guards outside the door, who were probably there for added security. The crowd suddenly roared, and the man who had led him in sat down close to the gap in the wall. Before nodding to the women seated beside him, he cast a fleeting glance outside. Sasuke has arrived. Instead of responding, the woman simply nodded before focusing on Naruto. Despite the nervous energy coursing through him, he remained motionless. Nervousness wasn't Naruto's strong suit. He became twitchy. Naruto was bad, and he was twitchy. Naruto is awkward. She finally said, so you are Sasuke's teammate? Her black hair was rolled up in a bun, and she wore a rather elegant kimono. Naruto could sense the anxious energy she exuded as the current clan leader, despite her delicate appearance. After the massacre, she had undoubtedly just been discovered to be next in line. Most likely, Sasuke would be the legitimate heir. Yes. He's my teammate, Naruto said softly, trying to divert his attention from the outside noises. He fixed his gaze on the woman. He could tell she was a civilian now that he had a chance to observe her more closely. He began to consider the number of remaining ninja in the Uchiha clan. Clearly the man was one. What about the other girl? A glance in her direction. She did have on a Chunin vest and the appropriate equipment. A ninja, too. Sasuke, however, gave the impression that there weren't even this many Uchiha left. Not to mention the village ninjas. She went on, he has mentioned you a number of times previously. She spoke softly. He seems to hold you in high regard. Another thunderous roar from the audience seemed to be triggered at the same moment. The home favorite was undoubtedly doing all right. This was a genuine surprise. Naruto blinked and his face went blank. Did Sasuke consider him a rival? Indeed, he had previously said that to the Uchiha boy numerous times. Even now, he never imagined that the two of them would share the idea. To think he had always been a standard for Sasuke. However, the true question was why. I wanted to ask you if you knew where he would be. But that seems useless now, considering who you're Chunin. Sensei, as I can see why he was so delayed in getting here. It's a good thing they allowed for extra time though. It would reflect badly on the clan if our future leader didn't even turn up to the finals of his very first Chunin exams. And that is something we can't afford to have right now. Uncertain of what to say, Naruto stood silent, but he could see what she was saying. With that said, I must admit I find you very interesting, Uzumaki-san. Sasuke made sure to note you several times as a ninja with very little real skill despite an obvious amount of potential. And yet you certainly didn't show little skill in that match of yours. Curious. But that is a situation for another time. I'm sure you'd rather be with your last teammate on cheering on Sasuke at this moment. To reinforce her argument, everyone outside let out a collective gasp. Yes, ma'am. was Naruto's honest response. He found the situation extremely unsettling, and if nothing else, he would much rather be down watching Sasuke's match in order to research both of his potential opponents for the upcoming bout. Then I suppose I should let you go, but we will meet again, Genin Uzumaki. Rather than being a suggestion, her words were a promise. Once more, Naruto made the wise decision to remain silent. Go on then. I'm sorry for wasting your time. As one of the Anbu guards held the door open, Naruto bowed at the waist before turning and leaving the room. Once he was a safe distance away, he let out a pent up sigh slowly. Although it had been much more difficult than he had anticipated, it was ultimately nothing he couldn't manage. Nevertheless, it would likely be wise to have Jiraiya give him some political education. He blinked. Wings? Why were there feathers? Whoa, genjutsu. As ridiculous as it sounded, Sakura had actually forgotten how well known her Chunin sensei was. More than 6 months had passed since the expedition to the Wave Village. Prior to that, she had only thought of the masked ninja as a skilled but indolent shinobi. And she had once more started to view the man as a skilled but lazy shinobi, despite the amount of fighting he had displayed on the way to the now famous bridge. When the A-rank noob.nin spoke so respectfully of her teacher, the awe that had echoed through her bones vanished. However, she was promptly reminded of the identity of the copy ninja. She got up from her seat and shook her head, indicating that the genjutsu had been defeated. As concealed ninja from both sides started to engage in combat with the civilians, the world around her was already in disarray. Alongside her, Ino and Choji had been rendered unconscious by Kiba, and Hinata had vanished from the seat a few minutes earlier. Shikamaru had just fallen where he had been coming down the stairs to meet and greet Lee and his teammate, who had also been sent under. As Asuna Chunin suddenly materialized in front of her, her hand already in mid kunai swipe, her breath caught in her throat. Like a hawk spotting a meal, Kakashi soared through the air, his speed surpassing even her ability to breathe. With a slit throat, the Chunin had slipped back down, over the railing, and onto the stands below. Kakashi stopped the kunai in a stabbing grip after spinning it along his right index finger. Before focusing on her, his one eye swiftly scanned the space behind her. The stern expression in his eyes served as an even more powerful reminder of her sensei's true shinobi nature. A lifelong killer who gained notoriety during a period of conflict. To him, this was not chaos. The day was spent at the beach. Despite the gravity of the situation, his voice was tight and controlled as he asked, "Sakura, where's Naruto?" She took a deep breath and drew her gaze away from the chaos and bloodshed all around them. Instead, she struggled to find her voice and concentrated on her Chunin sensei. To her own surprise, a hand swooped down and took one kunai off the pouch fastened to her thigh before it started to steady what had been a trembling left hand a moment before. I don't know. A member of the Uchiha clan came about 5 minutes before you got here. I think they wanted to ask him where you and Sasuke were." Her teacher clearly did not want to hear this response. His mask tightened around the lower portion of his face, and his brow furrowed. There was a definite look of disapproval in his single eye. Sakura made herself ignore the cries of dynamic power from Guy. And direct her attention to the current task. What ought she to do? Before she could stop herself, it came to her and she started moving again. Leaning to the side, she directed her chakra flow toward her friend's body. The girl had already gone on to the next genin when Ino's eyes slowly opened. Kakashi's mind started racing as he watched this with half attention. Sakura? The Yamanaka heiress asked before her thoughts adjusted to the circumstances. She sprang to her feet, almost squeaking with surprise. What's going on? As she approached Choji, the girl with the pink hair responded, "Sand and sound are attacking us." She sounded so calm that I was shocked once more. She was able to maintain her composure despite the chaos all around her. Naruto and Sasuke would have done it. Help me to wake the others. Kakashi abruptly yelled, "Damn it," and stopped her hand from reaching the round genin. Her eyes darted to where his head was pointing, then snapped around. As she saw her crush dash after the 3 sand genin through a hole in the arena wall, a sinking sensation began to form in the pit of her stomach. This is not good. Not good at all. Before she could stop herself, she said, "Sensei, where is Sasuke-kun going?" The Chunin gripped his kunai tighter and responded grimly, "To his death. Sabuka no Gara is. This isn't good. He was no doubt the Sand's trump card in this little operation. And now he's run off to regain control of his mental prowess. If he comes back it's going to mean bad news for us. But there's nothing to be done now. And Sasuke will be fighting 3-on-1. Not to mention I have no idea if Naruto is dead or not." Sakura found herself exclaiming, "He's not dead. as Ino stepped in to reawaken her teammate. She swallowed and stood back to her full height, giving her Chunin Sensei a determined look she wasn't even sure she could manage. I saw Naruto before Sensei. During the exam. Naruto has always been an idiot. But he's always been able to take care of himself, and he's gotten good. Really, really good. He beat that Neji guy with only a little trouble. I know he's around here somewhere fighting. In spite of the ever-deepening frown on his face, Kakashi appeared to take these words seriously. The Chunin quickly made a few hand seals and pricked his finger with the tip of his kunai before slamming his hand to the ground. A small dog with a small hite.8 appeared in a puff of smoke. If things weren't so bad, it would have been kind of cute. After shaking its tiny head, it returned its focus to the Chunin. "Yo Kakashi," it exclaimed, looking around before forming what appeared to be a frown with its maw. "You pissed someone off or something? What's with all the fighting going on around here? Suna and Otto are attacking Ispakun. I need you to take Sakura, 10, and Shikamaru after Sasuke. I'll find Naruto and send him after you as soon as I can. Can you do that?" With a sudden seriousness, the small pug lifted its paw in a salute. It flipped its body around and turned to face Sakura and the now busted Shikamaru, who moaned as he got up off the ground. "Can do. Come on kids. We don't have all day. Follow me unless you want to stay here and die." After exchanging brief looks, the two genin nodded their agreement. The small dog started to running off with the two genin in tow, hopping on the railing. After a brief moment of watching them leave, Kakashi returned his focus to the final two moving genin. He commanded, "Come on," to them. "We have to find Naruto." The nature of it was unnaturally surreal. He had previously faced overwhelming odds and had not given up. Instead of cowering in fear, he had decided to stand where most others would have. Nevertheless, the fear that had swept through his body served as a continual reminder that he might pass away at any time despite his valiant speeches and audacious declarations. That just for being out there, he would die at any time. That was not at all like this. He was unable to contain his panic despite the fact that there were a lot of more skilled and experienced enemy ninja attacking the arena. Rather, a strange kind of serenity seemed to wash over him. And the words of the old Hokage returned to the fore as he sidestepped punches, ducked kunai, and avoided ninjutsu. It's not always the shinobi with the fastest hands or even the biggest brain that wins the battle. But rather in my experience I find it the one with the greatest will and the most experience that wins. And when you add to the fact that you have the devil's luck like you my boy. In fact, Lady Luck had voluntarily turned into Naruto's bitch at some point. And now more than ever, it was evident. Compared to these other shinobi, he might not have participated in nearly as many battles. He has, however, undoubtedly been in more outmatched battles. He found a way to survive battles where he should have perished long ago. For him, being on the lower end of the spectrum had become something of a norm. But now that his luck was accompanied by some real skill. God-damned brat, he would get by just fine. As the Suna Chunin fell upon Naruto, he whirled around. The man had thrown himself into the air, aiming for the throat with a kunai extended for the kill. However, he appeared to Naruto to be moving through the water like a snail. Naruto had witnessed battles on the sea's waves between characters like Momochi Zabuza and Hitaki Kakashi. He had witnessed the legendary Snake Sanin's incredible speed as he ran circles around everything they threw at him. He had witnessed Rock Lee's celestial gates in all their savagery. The old toad pervert had shown him an astonishingly long list of ninjutsu. Most significantly, he had witnessed the technical intellect and jutsu combinations of the man who was once known as the Professor of Shinobi. No matter how much skill and experience they had, anyone who volunteered to kill him was nothing more than a bother in comparison to those feats and ninja. As the man fell, the blonde moved forward and grabbed his bicep. He spun around and threw the man over his shoulder. His hands reached down and whipped free one shuriken each, their movements unlike anything they had ever done before. One of the two ninja stars struck the chest, and the other struck the head. Before he could finish striking the round, he was already dead. However, Naruto didn't even bother to look. He had now killed 3 of them. And it wouldn't be the last, for sure. He was aware that the fact that he had not encountered any significant danger, such as an enemy Chunin, was due in large part to luck. However, he wasn't the type to gripe in this circumstance. He just concentrated on surviving and doing his best to assist. The boy went into a flurry of movement, like a well-rehearsed ballroom dance. He was propelled by confidence and adrenaline in ways he never would have imagined in real combat. He dipped low past one of his fallen comrades, holding a kunai in each hand. Before he even realized he had beaten his first opponent, he was on the sound ninja. The kunai was firmly grasped by the handle with the right hand, which jabbed it forward. The muscle tissue in the front of the throat was easily penetrated by the sharp iron. Aim high at all times. He had learned that from Jiraiya. Before the man could even reach for the wound, a quick tug freed the knife. He pushed off with the tips of his sandals just in time, launching himself backwards and out of the way of the 3 shuriken. He turned his body in that direction and pushed his right foot back. With his right arm extended and a gauntlet similar to the one Dosu had worn fastened to the forearm, the next sound ninja was crashing down on him. The blonde wasn't in the mood for repeat viewings because she had already seen this film. In one quick motion, he bowed his knees and kicked forward. He was taken aback by the speed and slammed both of his knives forward, striking the man in the rib cage before he could even start to swing his arm. Naruto leaned over him as they fell in a heap. After another tug, the bone and blood were separated by both knives. Before the man could even start coughing up blood, he was getting back up and going on to the next one. Thus, it went on in this manner for some time. Very little taijutsu and no ninjutsu. Everything they threw at him he sidestepped, bobbed, weaved, hopped, slid, and juked. Calm and collected eventually gives way to calculating and fierce. His eyes had become hard, edged as they narrowed to see past each attack, even though he was unable to see it. He had taken glancing blows from a few, with one sound attack even reaching him. Despite his stumbles, he managed to stay upright, running aside to avoid the follow-up. He also cut the throat of that man. Before long, the body count started to mount. 5, 6, 8, 12. He had been possessed. The demon of combat. The sand ninjas started to take notice, and the ninjas of sound started to pay attention. The leaf ninja started to take notice. Hake Kusho, air palm, 8 divination signs. At last, he halted his movement and lowered himself to a low crouch while releasing one of his kunai. In the back of one ninja's head, embedded. He glanced first to the left, then to the right. On his left, Hyuga Neji had apparently joined the battle. To his right was another Hyuga, a man. After a quick look at each of them, he turned to look at another dead body. A sand ninja wriggling feebly. It seems that during their battle, the Hyuga genin had not used that technique as much. With his arms raised, the Hyuga prodigy stepped backwards and greeted everyone curtly, Uzumaki. Naruto went back to the younger and elder and said, Hyuga. He got up and put the final kunai back in the pouch by his side. Observing for the first time how much blood was smeared on his cloak and hand, he continued to ignore it. Later was the time for disgust. They currently had a small following. Around them, there are roughly 7 sands and 4 sounds, each seeking revenge on a fellow. 3, 2, 1, nothing. Fire release, great fireball. Kaden, Die Enden. Even the 3 leaf ninja were taken aback by the size of the fireball. It rolled over the people they could see and past them. 8 or so of the ninja were killed by roasting. Finally, Naruto flinched in response to the cries of the tournament. They were also dead before the final few could move. Each of them saw 3 shuriken pass perfectly between their eyes. All of this was witnessed by the 3 leaf ninja. I was dumbfounded. Yo Gaki, together, they turned to face their rear end. When Naruto sees the overgrown orange toad, he blinks in surprise. As the Sannin leapt down, it gave a loud croak. Despite the happy greeting, he had a serious expression. Come with me, kid. We're going into the village to do work. Although the blonde genin appeared taken aback by the assertion, he nodded in agreement. He took a step forward and then jumped on the toad after nodding his head to either Hyuga. Jiraiya joined him, and before the toad abruptly leapt off, they both gave a mock ninja salute. In a toad with both the teacher and the student. Taking one step back to avoid his charging opponent, Hitaki Kakashi frowned. The 2 genin of Team 10 stood behind him, each gripping a kunai tightly, their eyes wide and their palms sweating. They observed as the Team 7 Chunin Sensei calmly sidestepped his latest opponent before slipping past the man's defense and slamming a knife up to the hilt into his spinal column using a basic academy bushin. In the last 5 minutes, that had been the 10th enemy fighter to rush his small trio. It was becoming, to put it mildly, annoying. As the home team of the Leaf faced off against the evading sound and sand forces, battles raged out onto the street all around the group. With pride, he looked around at the chaos and saw that the Konoha ninja were more than holding their own. The invaders were unable to establish a solid foothold despite their advantage of surprise. Kakashi's mind returned to the task at hand after considering that he had a personal obligation to uphold, but he also had an obligation to join the village defense. There was nothing he could do at this time, and he had just sent 3 young genin against a force they couldn't possibly compete with. Their only hope was that the attack would be repulsed before the Leaf's ninja could focus on the potential danger the sand container posed. And he believed that sticking together was the best way for them to survive in the interim. Naruto, where in hell are you? His eyes searched the battlefield for any hint of orange, he thought. His last genin was long dead, according to the ruthless, savage shinobi inside of him. Naruto had never been good at genjutsu, so his first thought was of the boy being hit by the first blow. The best he could hope for in that likely situation was that someone had pity on the boy and left him dozing off on the arena's chilly stone floor. A notion that was virtually scuppered when he looked around. But the leaf shinobi in him saw things differently. It found hope in her words and saw the intense emotion mirrored in his young Kunichi's eyes. Ebisu might have been able to impart some valuable knowledge to his young genin. Even though he would readily acknowledge that he was only a marginal teacher, a man like that could undoubtedly connect with a boy as crazy as Naruto. Perhaps, just perhaps, Naruto had learned enough from the odd special Chunin to be able to avoid the opening genjutsu and instead use his innate cunning to survive around the makeshift battlefield. The young genin in question might have mastered the art of using his shadow clones to their fullest potential on the battlefield. Or, at the very least, helped his fellow leaf shinobi get to safety by using the clones as decoys. The veteran Chunin continued because of that thought. In light of this, the man saw something that might be useful. He saw a glimmer of hope amid a particularly vicious battle. The head of the Hyuga clan was standing with Neji, the Hyuga boy who had been scheduled to battle the aforementioned genin. He saw as the two formed a vicious tag team, the younger shinobi finishing them with precision while the elder, more seasoned shinobi, delivered vicious blows that rendered the victim incapacitated. The Chunin turned to face the two genin he was carrying and scowled. In the time they had spent in the field, they had become much more relaxed and were now observing the surrounding fighting with less fear. Despite his lack of knowledge about the type of training Sarutobi Asuma had given his two young charges, he would not be shocked if it was even worse than what he had taught his two less gifted genin. Despite being a skilled shinobi, Asuma was inherently lazy. Kakashi could easily envision a situation where the other Chunin just let the three ninja in training concentrate on the techniques each of their families provided while he taught them the bare minimum of what was necessary, since each of his young genin came from clans with renown and the path for their personal development was obvious. It was a depressing idea, especially after he realized that was essentially what he had been doing. Make a mental note. He returned his focus to his surroundings and pondered. I'm going to work myself to the bone after this is over. However, that was for a later date. Crossing a vast area of unadulterated violence was currently his best chance of learning the fate of his final young shinobi. He had to make his way through it while protecting the lives of two other ninjas who were less experienced and skilled. Making sure that everyone left this safely and intact would be challenging, to put it mildly, and would take some skill. The Chunin calmly raised his right hand and pushed his forehead protector aside, keeping that line of thought fixed. He immediately started to analyze the situation with the aid of his now open red eye. Indeed, it would be challenging, but fortunately for them, he wasn't dubbed the copy ninja just for being catchy. The leaf Chunin inhaled deeply before returning his focus to the young ninja who had followed him thus far. When the two genin jumped at the tone of his voice, he barked, "Listen up," and instantly regretted it. "We're about to get into some heavy fighting, so I need for you to do whatever I say." As they gazed at his mismatched eyes with their own wide, the two genin nodded. Ignoring it, he pointed with his head toward the crowded battleground in front of them before taking another look around to make sure there was still enough space for him to talk. "We're going to be going over there to the front of that shopping area. The Hyuga clan head is there and may need some help. After we secure that section, I'll be asking for his help in finding Naruto. It shouldn't be a problem at all for him to hunt Naruto down using his kekkei genkei. But in order for this to work, I need to make sure you two are safe. That means you'll have to stay with me at all times so that I can protect you. Got it?" They looked in the direction he had previously indicated and nodded in agreement. At the sight of it, the Akamichi boy grimaced. To Kakashi's surprise, though, the young Yamanaka merely inhaled deeply before tightening her hold on the kunai. Perhaps he had harmed her by dismissing her as just another fangirl posing as a ninja. Perhaps there was still hope for them. "All right. Let's go," exclaimed Kakashi as he led the two genin in a trailing position and started out quickly. The head of the Hyuga clan might be able to assist in finding the stray blonde. And he could at least let him know whether or not his genin had been chopped down. "Go Gaki. Go." As he jumped from his perch atop the toad summon, Naruto disregarded the white-haired shinobi's yell. The blonde landed after flashing through 3 seals in midair, but instincts pushed him to the left, where he rolled across the ground. Before turning his focus back to the location of the shuriken that had almost skewered him, he paused on one knee. The sound of kunoichi approached quickly, and he turned his palm toward it. "Fuden." Daitopa, wind release, outstanding innovation. The chakra. Infused gust slammed into the oncoming ninja head, on as it rushed across the distance. To her credit, she had anticipated the attack and had crossed her arms to protect her face. Chakra had kept her firmly grounded rather than uprooted, as the blonde had first hoped. Nevertheless, he launched himself forward into a body flicker, making do with what he had. He kicked up dirt behind him as he came out of chakra transit and slid to a stop next to her. As soon as her hands snapped off a quartet of senbon at close range, the kunyachi reacted violently. The blonde moved and grimaced as the metal needles penetrated his body, but he continued to move. He had pushed into her space like a hurricane before her arms could start to pull back. He switched his left hand into a spinning elbow with his right, and a powerful hook with his left almost leveled her. He pulled the blood-stained kunai free and slammed it into her throat in the same motion as his opponent fell with her bell ringing and dropped his right knee into her stomach. The toad sage hopped down to join him, and he jumped away from the already dead body. Before his face hardened, he gave the now dead sound ninja a startled glance. After giving the blonde a calm glance, he nodded as if in gratitude and then pointed to the fresh wounds the blonde was sporting. With hands that were trembling a little, Naruto reached up to each opposing shoulder before yanking them free with a vicious yank that even startled him. Most people would have grimaced at the red-hot pain that poured through the points of entry. Not him. In addition, he had previously suffered much more from the needles. Jiraiya looked around them quickly and asked, "Those poisoned?" At the moment, they had no enemies nearby. Without a doubt, the enormous toad that had started to terrorize the invaders was a clear enough sign of who they were up against. Naruto's now extremely sensitive nose twitched as he glanced at the blood-stained tips of the metal spikes. The blonde sniffed them and then tossed them to the ground with a head shake, while the toad sage watched in fascination. The blonde rolled his shoulders to try to ease the pain and said, "Don't think so. Didn't smell like anything but blood. Not going to slow me down anyway." The Sannin gave a head shake. He reprimanded the young shinobi in front of him, saying, "Answers like that are what get you killed, kid." The little blonde surprised him by looking directly into his eyes. The genin questioned, his eyes full of defiance, "If I die defending the village, I died doing something useful, right? Or at least that's what they say." The man's mouth opened to respond, then shut. That's what they said, indeed. And regardless of how much he claimed to despise this place, it was expected of him as a Konoha shinobi. He could remember that much, at least. However, even so. The Sannin pinned him with his gaze and said, "Naruto. Don't let anyone tell you you're not a damn Konoha shinobi. You've more than proven your worth on this day. No matter what you choose to do with your life, be proud of what you've accomplished here and now as you fought and risked death along with your comrades." The words caught the blonde off guard. He just stared back at the man, unable to respond with anything. Jiraiya grinned at his new pupil, who then nodded as though he had finally found what he was looking for. That seemed to be more than enough. "I'm going to go up to the tower and see if I can't do something about that barrier Orochimaru has erected to keep the old man trapped. In the meantime, just keep doing what you've been doing, kid. Remember what we taught you and you'll be fine." The grin broadened. "You've more than proved you can handle your own." Before his body flickered away and left the blonde alone, he only said, "Good luck." After a few more seconds of staring at the location the sage had just left, Naruto's gaze shifted back to their surroundings. Before taking off in the direction of the nearest battle he could hear, the blonde inhaled deeply and drew his cloak closer to his body. The toad wise man was correct. On this day, he had more than demonstrated his value. He now needed to ensure that everyone was aware of it. Before his mouth could even open to scream, the sound shinobi was already dead. Hitaki Kakashi was both disappointed and irritated as he watched the body fall to the ground in front of him. To put it plainly, these auto shinobi were pitiful. They lacked effective tactics and performed a poor job of adapting their limited strategies in the heat of battle. They were more numerous than they were skilled. They had no discernible differences in ability and fell excruciatingly easily. They exemplified what it meant to be cannon fodder soldiers. Orochimaru sounds like that. As his arm blasted forward into a vicious right jab that broke the nose of an oncoming ninja, he thought. But because there were sand shinobi all over the place, the fight had already been going on for more than 2 hours. Despite lacking the sheer numbers that the Auto troops claimed, the Suna ninja made up for it with real skill. They were well prepared and effective. Their natural affinity for wind ninjutsu and their use of debilitating poisons made them ideal opponents for Konoha's numerous fire jutsu users. To put it briefly, a battle that ought to have been relatively simple turned out to be extremely challenging. Kakashi moved forward to meet his current goal, tossing aside his most recent kill. Additionally, the 2 members of the Hyuga clan had defeated their final set of adversaries. When the younger of the two began to pant and perspire, the Junin's mismatched eyes took over. The fact that this boy was able to stand, let alone fight, spoke volumes about his strength of will if the rumors about the exam were accurate. The Junin could readily see how he earned the title of genius based on the way he handled himself, even though he must have been worn out and bruised. And Naruto was meant to have defeated him in some way? As he came closer, the two young genin he had been escorting followed, and the older of the two turned to face him. Even during this crisis, the head of the Hyuga clan was a picture of composure compared to his younger companion. His long hair remained flawless, and the faint gleam of perspiration on his forehead was the only indication that he had been in combat. He encountered the copy ninja halfway through, carefully avoiding the corpses surrounding him. He nodded his head slightly in greeting, then turned to face the two genin behind him, Hitaki-san, and company. The Junin replied with a small bow of respect, Hyuga Sama, I come to you in need of your help, I need. The man interrupted, saying, my Byakugan, to find your genin, Uzumaki Naruto. After scowling, Kakashi nodded his head slowly, you know of my request? The man answered, it wasn't hard to figure out. As a Junin sensei, one of your first thoughts should be focused on the safety of the young ninja in your command. To be honest, I would think less of you if you hadn't been looking for him. And as luck will have it, I did see your genin not long ago. You did? Kakashi asked, grabbing onto something that had relaxed in his stomach. Naruto remained alive. Is he well? The head of the Hyuga clan snorted. More than well, he felled several of the bodies in this area himself. With a blink of his discolored eyes, the Junin turned his head to look around him. Had Naruto been engaged in combat here, and being successful? Just the thought was mind-blowing. What on earth had he learned from Ebisu? With caution, he inquired, he assisted you? The man gave a nod. Yes, and did a fairly good job of it. You train your genin well. Still in a daze, the Junin said, thank you. Did you see where you went from here? Once more, the Hyuga gave a nod. Yes. We were about to engage a group when they were all cut down before any of us could move. Then the boy was pulled away and taken to another area. To where I presume another part of the battle had been going on. Taken? Asked the Junin. Taken by who? Hyuga replied, I think it was Jiraiya Sama. He's the only one I know who can use toads as a summon. For the third time in the past few minutes, Kakashi stood in a state of complete bewilderment. Jiraiya? Was this the village where the Sannin was? And had removed his genin to aid in the battle somewhere? What on earth? They seemed to know each other. He called for Uzumaki and the boy went without question. Then they left with the toad due east. I believe that's where the bulk of the fighting has been going on. Kakashi closed his lower jaw and then slowly nodded. He was at a loss for words and simply said, thank you for your assistance. It is of no problem, but I must ask if you've seen Yuhi Kurenai anywhere? The man asked. Kakashi gave nod. He thought, yes, she stayed along at the arena to better protect the civilians. I believe both your daughters were among those that were being escorted away to safety. In the man's eyes, Kakashi saw something that seemed to be relief. He nodded his gratitude to the man and said, thank you, Junin Hitaki. It is no trouble Hyuga-san. Now if you'll excuse me, I have to find my genin. As his eyes took on the distinctive protruding veins of his kekkei, the man said, good luck to you. Without saying a word, Kakashi headed east without even making sure the two genin he had been with were still with him. Had Jiraiya removed Naruto, and personally knew him? He realized that the man might have wanted to ensure the boy's safety because he had seen him during the exams or had heard enough about him. Perhaps he had relocated Naruto to a shelter to protect him from harm? Or perhaps the blonde's favorite ramen bar was where they first met? Or perhaps... Kakashi began as a form of thought. Perhaps my genin had not been taught by Ebisu at all. That was another thought, and the more he considered it, the more logical it seemed. He would not, however, receive any answers here. Getting the story directly from the source would be the best course of action for him. So he took to the rooftops and ran to the battleground, keeping that in mind. As the gust of wind roared past, it tore shingles off the rooftops. Long before the jutsu was finished, the blonde had been in motion. With a swift retreat, the young genin had nowhere to put his feet. He fell into the alleyway between the two buildings as a result. He landed in a crouch between the buildings as his fellow Leaf Shinobi were blasted away, and then he ran out into the open streets. As the invading forces pressed the attack, chaos remained the norm around the Leaf Village. Naruto had long since forgotten how long he had been engaged in combat. Fatigue had started to seep into his bones after an enemy ninjutsu tore his cloak apart a long time ago. Not even he, with the legendary vitality of the Uzumaki clan, could sustain this for the entire day. Nevertheless, he continued to push forward like the leaf forces, fending off attacks wherever he could. While the sand forces arrived in droves, armed with expertise and skill, the sound ninja arrived in waves, equipped with metal and technology. It made no difference. They all succumbed to the leaf village's power. It was becoming increasingly clear. This battle would not be won by the Sand and Sound coalition. But that won't deter them from trying. Nor did he necessarily hold them responsible. No matter how hopeless the cause, he was determined to fight to the end. At least he could admire their resolve. He didn't have to be kind to them, though. Another group he encountered was engaged in combat. 2 from Sound and 3 Sand ninjas against 3 of his own. As the combined forces continued to surprise them, the Leaf Chunin were gradually being driven back. Despite the defeat, they continued to fight. Before being overwhelmed by a surge of shuriken, the blonde flinched as one took a kunai to the thigh. The time had come for work. After taking a deep breath, a flurry of shuriken flew out of his hands, only to be transformed into a storm by a single seal. Long before that, the Leaf Ninja had spotted him coming and had stepped out of the star's way. In response, one of the Sound Shinobi and the 3 Sand Ninjas swiftly left as well. The final one, Akunyachi Sound, wasn't as fortunate. Before she could even determine what had caused the sudden movement, the metal had been splattered across her back. She died long before she realized what had happened thanks to a fortunate flick to the back of the head. One of the sand particles in his path caused the remaining Sound Ninja hand to turn and meet his advance. The blonde hurried forward to meet the two after focusing on them. With ease, the Sand Shinobi passed his comrade and arrived at the blonde first. His face was covered by a curtain of cloth, and he was long and tall. The blonde discovered crucial information about his opponent in 2 seconds that he never would have thought possible. He wanted his strength and length to be used in taijutsu. Naruto would then hand it to him. As the seals the Toad Sage had grafted onto him released, a fierce burning sensation swept across his skin in a flash of chakra. As his muscles relaxed and his chakra coils untangled deep within his body, a sigh of relief escaped his lips. The man claimed it was a dangerous seal from his long-lost clan, used to increase the strain of channeling chakra and the difficulty of movement in order to train the body to thrive. It could kill a man if used improperly. It could suffocate a man if it is sealed incorrectly. It would blow up a man if it were released incorrectly. He had spent a lot of time making sure Naruto would not experience any of the 3 possibilities. They had been moved by the blonde. Being a human bomb was not what anyone wanted. The boy shifted his weight, pushed off the tips of his feet, and bounded forward with almost twice the speed he had before. Before experience made his body adjust to the blonde's abrupt increase in movement, the Sand Shinobi blinked in surprise. The blonde jumped up and kicked him in the chest, raising his arms into a cross block. The genin forced his opponent off balance by pushing off into a backflip while using the block as a base. As the Sound Shinobi rushed past his comrade, he landed in a crouch. To avoid the shuriken burst that preceded the latest threat, the blonde forced himself back into a roll. By the time the Sand Ninja got to him, he was standing again, his base wide. Before he fell back to the ground, he dodged a swing and spun his body to the side to avoid the subsequent knee. The blonde extended his right leg while using his hands for balance, then executed a textbook leg sweep that brought his opponent to his knees. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement that made the blonde dodge instead of hit his fallen foe. As the minor wind ninjutsu ripped through the air, he fell flat on his stomach. The genin was forced to bite his lower lip to keep from screaming as the technique's edges tore at his back and clothes. The Sound Ninja who had been on the ground beside him had regained his balance by the time the ninjutsu was finished. After a kunai struck his back, he was replaced by a cage bushin and a single cross seal. The blonde made another single from behind an overturned stall, wincing as the memory hit him, and then he was able to sink into the road almost silently thanks to 5-hand seals. As he passed beneath the battle ahead, he used a burst of chakra to push the stone and earth out of his way. At the same moment that his clone knocked his opponent to the ground, he used the vibrations as a guide to locate his target and free himself. Doden. Zanshu Shinju. Earth release. Decapitation of double suicide. Before he realized what had happened, his hands had already closed around the Sound Shinobi. As he rose, another chakra burst pulled his target down. The Sound Ninja had been buried up to the neck, and the blonde pulled his feet free. The blonde rotated his shoulders and used the downward momentum to slam the blade into the skull after a single hand motion pulled one of his few surviving kunai. As he jumped away to avoid more shuriken, the blonde declared, "Double suicide." As a second wind jutsu came crashing down on him, he landed and instantly switched to his clone. Later, as the blonde flipped through a flash of his own seals, a body flicker had closed the distance between them. Repusho, Fuden. Gale Wind Palm. Wind release. The unprepared Suna shinobi was struck by the two waves of wind chakra. The strong dual stream hit him squarely in the chest, sending him flying off his feet and end over end. The blonde's subsequent attack was cut short by movement to the side, and he instead took the time to observe as the technique's residual wind captured the tiny stream of fire and enlarged it with oxygen. The sand shinobi was caught by the team when he struck the ground by the newly formed fireball. Naruto focused on the two other leaf ninja nearby, forcing himself to ignore the terrible stench of burning flesh and the cries of death. Before they both nodded toward him and took off, they appeared to give him a long, measured look. The blonde stood for just one more second before making his way to the roofs as well, only to be struck directly by a powerful wind ninjutsu. He was thrown through a nearby window and through the air by the attack. He rolled to the ground, only to stop when he struck a wall, and all he could remember of his trip was glass and pain. He started to bleed out onto the floor, letting out a moan. He pushed the pain to the back of his mind and forced his weary body to move because he was convinced that a follow-up could happen at any time. He snapped his head up, drawn by the sound of glass breaking. His gaze followed the outline of the man who had attacked him, who was seated with one foot in the room and leaning carelessly in the window frame. He had swooped between the buildings to avoid the same sound shinobi from earlier. 3 other leaf shinobi had stepped up to take on the man the last time he saw him before he vanished. They had obviously failed. The words were detached and patronizing. "Well, looks like I found you, little rat." The blonde's blood boiled because of them. "I wasn't sure where you had gone that quick." While the man was speaking, the genin had pulled himself to his knees. He inhaled deeply, turned his shoulder, and sat up on his heels. He quickly realized that the glass that had struck his back had caused deep cuts as pain flared throughout his body. "And so you just chose to track me down?" The man grinned. "Right in one. I don't like it when my prey gets away." The blonde took a deep breath and said, "Ah." He pushed himself to his feet in spite of the pain and looked closely at his new enemy, saying, "So you're that kind of guy." The exertion of the day was rapidly beginning to catch up with him, and his head was starting to ache. He was aware that he was far from finished, though. The man entered the building completely. "Not really. But Lord Orochimaru told us about you. Said you were a useless and talentless idiot, but he would make sure the one who brought you his head would become one of his greatest Chunin." The words caused Naruto to grunt, but he remained silent. Rather, he considered them. Had he been hit out at by that snake bastard? Guy was starting to be a real pain in the ass. Then a digression crept into his mind. He looked at his assailant and repeated, "One of his greatest Chunin." He had ate once more, taking in the man's clothes. "Don't tell me that weird snake guy is your village leader." Immediately, the smirk turned into a sneer. Every word was pounded out with utter contempt that oozed from the letter. "Lord Orochimaru is a great and powerful shinobi. And you aren't even fit to talk about him with your filthy tongue." Anger began to grow, and Naruto bit his lip. In the brief time since they first met during the second part of the exam, this bastard had caused him a great deal of trouble. He took a deep breath and remained focused. He couldn't afford to be upset. He had learned the hard way from the Hokage what happened to people who were unable to control their emotions. The result was sloppiness. And being careless led to their death. "You were careless out of anger." The expression has changed to a smile. "I don't really care what Pale Face is like. He's still a weirdo. And for some reason he seems intent on attacking little boys. Kinda peculiar, no?" It seemed to do the trick. Before he burst into action, the man's face appeared to go completely serious for a brief moment. Before Naruto could catch his breath again, the man had already moved into his personal area. To dodge the straight aimed at him, the genin cocked his head to the left, his eyes wide. The blonde raised both of his palms and slapped aside the rising knee to his right side, ignoring the fist that had slammed into the wall close to his head. The blonde had enough distance to break free after a swift left jab to the ribs and a right hook to the stomach. After a cross seal, the blonde took his time separating himself from his opponent, and a shadow clone moved forward to confront him. After a flash of 5 seals, Naruto shushed out of the building, his overworked body strained. After a particularly intense taijutsu session, the blonde flashed through another set of hand seals and slapped his hands to the ground as his clone dispelled. To deflect a gust of wind, a little mass of dirt rose to create a little barrier. The blonde successfully figured out how the man employed the technique so frequently in quick succession while biting his bottom lip. He must be holding those strange pipes. As he performed a brief 3-handed move and started concentrating his chakra, his thoughts drifted back to the preliminary rounds. Similar to the exam guy. That was about as far as his thoughts could go. Long before his mind had caught up to the movement, his body was moving thanks to newly developed instincts. A cross block had neatly evaded the snapped kick that had been aimed at his face. Before engaging in a fierce taijutsu match, the blonde quickly leapt to his feet and used the force to roll back for distance. He slapped the offending limb in retaliation after just avoiding a jab that was aimed at his face. The blonde, intent on taking advantage of the small gap, lunged forward, but had to stop when his opponent kicked him, flipping the situation. The genin slid back, almost toppled by the blow that struck him in the head. Before he realized how suddenly dangerous he was, he hunched over in agony and grabbed his stomach. When he saw the now victory and deranged smile, his eyes jerked up to meet it. What a waste! Zankuha, beheading waves of air. Long before the Chunin had even reached a full meter, the Sannin had turned around. The older shinobi examined the copy ninja and his younger companions with seasoned eyes. He glanced over the man's trajectory with ease and concluded that he had been looking for him for a while. It became painfully clear why he had reached that conclusion. As he focused on him, the Chunin greeted him, Jiraiya, Sama. The Toad Sage returned the greeting with, Hitaki, before turning to face the two genin behind him, and company. When he landed on the same building, Kakashi nodded his head respectfully and said, Sir. It was prudent to show respect where it was due, even though the man was not his official superior. I've been searching for you. The sage crossed his arms after nodding. His eyes returned to the man, and he calmly corrected, You mean to say you've been searching for Naruto? I can see the distress on you. The Chunin wears a mask and frowns. His mismatched eyes darted around the room for the tail orange his young student typically wore, and he said, Yes sir. I was informed he may have been with you. The Hyuga clan head said you took him with you. Once more, the sage nodded. I did. And then I left him join the fight around here. He was doing well. The scowl grew deeper. Sir, with all due respect, was that wise? Jiraiya laughed. I've known Naruto for long enough to know he doesn't usually do wise. I found him already knee-deep in this conflict. And at any rate I hope you don't expect for him to sit around. Genin are not easy solitaire of this village, this country, and in a crisis like this we need all the able-bodied shinobi we can get. The man retorted, I wouldn't call Naruto able-bodied sir. This isn't a good place for him. No place is right now. Jiraiya calmly replied. In case you didn't notice, this is as good as a declaration of war. We have to repel this enemy force. Shelters won't do anything to help him. And at any rate I didn't send him off to one for a reason. The frown changed from disappointment to bewilderment. I'm sorry? Orochimaru. Was the man's blunt response. He deliberately avoided the glances of the young genin behind the man, saying, You don't know him like I do. He doesn't let anything to chance. The idea that Naruto could turn the tide of the battle alone with that is more than enough for him to single the boy out. Kakashi's face brightened a bit. I know sir, but even still I can't help but think. The sage snapped, that he's not ready. There are career Chunin out here who have seen less dangerous foes, so hiding him somewhere wouldn't help. I know that. However, we're never really prepared for live combat. Experience comes from life, and from what I've heard, Naruto already has more experience than most do simply because of the high-level battles he's been around. In any case, there's a strong possibility that Orochimaru will deliberately send his men looking for the boy. That would endanger other people. Hitaki Kakashi, there is a method to my insanity. If I can avoid it, I prefer not to endanger the lives of others. Especially Naruto. As he gestured with his hands to the area around him, the Chunin repeated gravely, I know that sir. But if you'd let me finish I would have told you that I just didn't think this was the best place for him. I've had the genin all band together to stay safe. I intended to send him to meet the others. The sage scowled this time. Where should I send them? Uchiha Sasuke took off after Sabuka no Gaara and his siblings, the man replied, out into the forest surrounding the village. After sending a force to get him, I wanted them to remain together. The sage deadpanned, he pursued the sandboy, the unstable Jinchuriki? The Chunin retorted, I never really explained what Gaara was to him. No one ever said he was experienced himself. In any case, I believe Genma, the proctor, gave Sasuke the order to follow them. As he considered what the Chunin had been saying, the Toad Sage muttered, damn it. The village would be in serious trouble if the boy unleashed the Ichibi, and it would take time for him to create the right channels to cut off its power, a time they didn't have. Unless it was stalled by something. Even though he detests the idea that a Jinchuriki's first job was to protect the village, Naruto's first job was to at least hold back the Suna weapon. The problem was that Naruto was largely cut off from his own otherworldly chakra, so even though he could use it in an emergency, it would take a lot of work to summon it up, and even then, it would be insignificant compared to what the blonde could use. As it was, Naruto would still turn into a smear on the ground if he attempted to confront the Ichibi. Unless. The realization struck the sage like a ton of bricks. Naruto was incredibly gifted. The Uzumaki clan members each had a unique chakra to go along with their legendary stamina and vitality, and Naruto's triple nature was particularly unique, as they had witnessed. The blonde technically had the tools to dominate a potential battle with his kekkei tota, making him the ideal counter to the Suna Jinchuriki's distinctive sand techniques. However, the primary issue in this hypothetical scenario was perhaps the most significant one: control. Despite years of practice, including with the shadow clone method, Naruto lacked the necessary control to fully employ his technique, and they simply did not have that kind of time at the moment. Still, though, the wise man once said, "I work best under pressure." Let's see if he can support that claim. If that's the case, then they'll need more than sticking together to survive. The man then replied, "I'll see if a certain someone has the ability to stop it." The variously shaded eyes of Kakashi widened. "Do you think he can?" He calmly ignored the two genin who stepped up to either side of him and started to observe him with curiosity, saying, "I haven't seen him in so long, so I wouldn't know what he's capable of." The Sannin shrugged and said, "I'm not sure. At least he can slow it down long enough for me to handle it appropriately. You should keep looking for Naruto in the interim. He was going east when I last saw him. He couldn't have traveled very far." "Thanks," said the Chunin, nodding. "I'll have the genin rendezvous with him once I locate him." "All right. Up here, I'll keep it." It didn't take a genius to figure out that the man was concerned about that specific issue, trying to find out through Orochimaru's barrier. His face twisted at the mere thought. Instead of pointing that out, Kakashi gave a mock salute and then looked at the genin on his left, the Akamichi boy who still had the expression of a scared doe in his eyes but managed to keep it together. "All right, group. A final effort to locate Naruto. Somewhere around here, he is. We'll finally part ways once we locate him. You three will make your way directly to the arena and then return through the open hole. Pakun is aware that he must leave a trail for you to follow, so it should be fairly easy to find. Is that clear?" Asuma had apparently taught them enough to never show fear, and Kakashi smiled briefly at the little display of false bravado as the two genin on either side nodded their heads resolutely before drawing their kunai. He flicked his hands to bring the two into line behind him, and then he resumed his search for his errant genin, hoping to locate him as soon as possible before recommitting himself to the endeavor to put an end to this nightmare. Even those who appeared to have a kind of hero worship for the robe leaf ninja were not blind to the man's actions. Screams of agony were commonplace, and teams had frequently been sent out to retrieve new test subjects for the man's work. It was no secret that Orochimaru was strange. There had even been rumors of people who had failed in particular tasks being used in experiments as punishment. Yes, one became accustomed to odd things in Auto, but that did not mean that one was always prepared for unexpected surprises. As the smoke and dust subsided and the atmosphere calmed down, it became clear why the only thought the shinobi could come up with was, "What?" The blonde stood at full height and rolled his neck, and the Auto shinobi saw something glinting in the late day sunlight. He watched with wide eyes as his younger opponent pulled down his crossguard and looked back at him with his now slightly darker shade of blue eyes. In a quiet response, the blonde said, "Shodan. Keshou no Yoroi. Crystal release. Crystal armor." "Shodan?" As he examined his candidate, the Auto shinobi muttered, "I've never heard of such a release." As he dipped his hips and eased his left leg back a little, Naruto replied, "Because of its rarity. I was concerned it wouldn't form in time. It's the fastest I've ever forced the chakra to take. And to think that it repelled your wind ninjutsu as well." "I see." The patronizing sneer reappeared. "I'm sure my lord will reward me even more when I bring your corpse back to him. This is one of his favorite small tricks." A grin crept onto the blonde's face as he said, "If you like that trick you'll love the next few." He raised his right arm and bent it at the elbow, curled his fingers, and brought his left arm into a fist at his side. The two shinobi just blurred into motion without any further words or warnings. By the time the wind technique roared free of the strange tubes and emerged in a slit across the ground to the left of his attacker, Naruto was in mid body flicker. The blonde grabbed a handful of the sound ninja and used his weight to forcefully turn his opponent, taking the Auto shinobi by surprise and forcing him to spin bodily to the left. With a speed that belied his age, the blonde dodged the last of the strange ninjutsu's currents and, in the space between blinks, he closed the distance between them before slamming his shoulder into his opponent's stomach. The blonde took a quick step back until he grabbed both shoulders and used his weight to drop the man onto a rising knee, and the sound of snapping teeth made the blonde smirk as the Auto shinobi's head snapped back from the force, causing him to hunch over on contact. As his opponent dropped, Naruto dug his crystal coated right hand into the ground and grabbed a handful of dirt while forming a single half seal with his left. The young genin never stopped attacking, and he swiftly moved his body to the ground in another leg sweep. Then, he leaned a knee on his opponent's chest, the dirt in his hand solidifying into a single gleaming piece of reflective crystal. He slammed it into the sound shinobi's chest without thinking twice. As the man beneath him started to choke and gargle, the blonde muttered, "Kesho kanai." For a moment, it occurred to him that his stab must have punctured a lung, but he pushed the thought away and stood up. With just one more look, the blonde turned on his heels and started to leave. A body flicker placed the blonde on the roof of a nearby village as his eyes searched the area for his presumed assailant. By the fifth step, something jolted at his senses, and his newly formed instincts had the blonde moving long before the flurry of shuriken had even struck. He's not to the left or right, and his eyes are flitting around, so he must be below. The blonde rapidly turned to watch as the entire building fell to rubble before his eyes picked up something in the wreckage. The realization came just in time to save his life. By the time the genin's feet had cleared the side of the roof, the entire structure appeared to collapse on itself completely. As the bundle moved to reveal itself as a man, he thought, "What the hell is this guy?" His height was the first thing the blonde noticed about him. He was taller than anyone Naruto had met so far, and he was fit and lean, not particularly muscular but not skinny, with his long white hair and bright green eyes being the most noticeable features. The blonde then noticed his peculiar attire, which was more like a loose flowing garment with a purple sash than typical shinobi attire. Overall, the blonde could see that this was no ordinary shinobi. "Are you Naruto Uzumaki?" At the unexpected question, the blonde blinked. The voice was different from what he had expected. It was composed, calm, and full of total confidencia, the kind of laid-back composure that had no place on the battlefield. The blonde recognized the confidence for what it was. "Can I ask who you are?" "I am," he answered as confidently as he could. After a moment of silence during which Naruto was not expecting a response, the man said, "My name is Kimimaro. A chief general in Lord Orochimaru's army." The blonde was already beginning to aggregate, and the words were delivered with the same callous composure as before. It validated his suspicions based on the wardrobe. "I'm going to assume that you're specifically out to kill me?" The man nodded after cocking his head slightly, "Indeed. Yes." As he stood up on his toes to stretch, the blonde muttered, "I figured so." The truth was that he wanted to do nothing but fight at the moment, as his body hurt all over and even his ridiculously large chakra coils were starting to burn from constant use. He wasn't sure how long the fights would last, but he was certain he couldn't continue this for very long. "He doesn't seem to care. I have only witnessed that ability once before," said the man, Kimimaro, again. "That ability is impressive. The alleged other user passed away. Is that correct?" As he started to plot his strategy for the impending conflict, the blonde paused. "How long ago was this?" "A few years ago," the man said, shrugging his slender shoulders. "My Lord Orochimaru's servant." The blonde scowled at the thought. He had been told that although there was little chance that anyone else had his elemental affinity, there was still a chance to hear of another so quickly, and a former member of the attacking force. Nevertheless, given how hard the Sandaime worked to conceal it, it was highly unlikely that Orochimaru could have known about his ability beforehand. This implied that the man was merely predicting a hit on him beforehand, most likely from the altercation in the forest, but his most recent opponent mentioned it as though he knew about it beforehand, which could only indicate that he was observing the final battle with a frown on his face, which indicated that he had already been assessing his attacks. He probably noticed that the blonde was worn out and exhausted, so he decided that this was the ideal moment to attack. In addition, his composed demeanor gave the blonde reason to believe that he had been pursuing her for some time. This man didn't just brag about being one of Orochimaru's best soldiers for the sake of boasting. He meant it wholeheartedly, and that meant the Naruto was outclassed. The fact that he had managed to evade Jiraiya's and his own awareness spoke volumes about his own abilities. The blonde was arrogant but not foolish, and he was aware that many of his fast kills had been the result of both his own surprising abilities and his opponent's underestimation of them. Naruto's age and lack of a vest made it obvious to the attackers that he was only a genin, and as a result, they expected a genin challenge, which ultimately proved to be their undoing. But he wouldn't be caught off guard because this one had been observing him. "We might as well get this started," the boy sighed and said, "Well." His life was narrowly saved by his improved reaction time. He threw himself backward in an attempt to avoid the sudden attack, but it didn't work. Whatever it was hit him square in the forehead, and the blonde's new defensive ninjutsu hadn't been able to stop it completely, as evidenced by the wet feeling on the tips of his fingers. Naruto rolled with the blow, sprawling out on his stomach, his right hand instantly shooting to his forehead as his vision went blurry from the pain. "What the fuck was that? Son of a..." His clear eyes told him the story. The man was still standing where he had been, but the blonde could now see that his stance had changed. His left hand was pointing at the blonde, and his right leg had been moved back. Naruto had hardly noticed the movement when he had attempted to flee, and it was clear that it had not been enough. The rest of the puzzle was put together by a quick glance at the ground, where a single white projectile, roughly oval in shape and covered in blood, lay where he had been struck. The blonde blinked at the odd weapon before something made him remember that red and ivory combination he had seen once before, close to the start of his training session with the Sandaime Hokage, from a time when he had been too slow to avoid what was now a relatively easy strike. It was a bone. Did he shoot his fucking bone at me? The blonde moaned as he got to his knees. He didn't get very far with his thought. The cool, collected voice said, "You should never take your eyes off of your opponent." In one instant, the blonde was halfway to his feet and in mid-spin after reacting with all the speed and violence he could muster. He calmly sidestepped the backfist by taking a step back, but then his attacker slammed a foot into his chest with the force of a fleeing beer truck. Naruto felt the air leave his lungs and knew without a doubt that he would have been folded in half like a pretzel if he hadn't been wearing his new crystal armor. Instead, he was thrown backward with enough force to knock him off his feet completely, hitting the ground with a thump and sliding backwards for about a foot before something caught the corners of his vision. The blonde used all of his strength to roll to the right just in time to avoid the follow-up attempt, forcing himself back onto his stomach and taking a quick look back at his newest foe. "Are you seriously joking?" With wide eyes, the shocked blonde mumbled. The blonde saw that even though there was an ivory piece of bone sticking straight into the air, the arm had not lost any of its structure. Rather, it appeared as though the man had simply duplicated another in its place. The blonde acknowledged that the man had been attacking him with bones, such as the one that came out of his forearm, which had pierced the ground exactly where the blonde's throat had just been. The blonde snarled and pushed himself back up as fast as he could, while his opponent calmly pulled his arm away. The man, Kimimaro, answered the question, "Shikatsumiku. My kekkei Genkei. The Kaguya clan, from which I am descended, came from the hidden mist." He turned to the blonde and stood calmly, saying, "I was called the most gifted before our fall at the hands of the bloodline purges. With this, we became the village's ultimate taijutsu masters." "Well. Okay." Naruto replied blankly while his mind raced behind his surprise. He had briefly remembered something about this when he had once asked the Toad Sage about the other bloodline limits of the world. But it was only mentioned in passing. "That's gotta hurt." "I became used to the pain quite some time ago," the man said with a slight shrug. "Ah." The blonde ducked under a swing before slamming his hands to the ground. The genin slapped his hands together and started to seal, reaching the third before the man was on him. As the makeshift shield obscured the young teen from view, the ground between them abruptly surged upward towards the sky, forcing the Auto Shinobi to back off. Naruto, running on adrenaline, forced his body into a body flicker and fled to a nearby rooftop, just in time to see the entire wall he had erected pierced. When two ninja met with the intention of drawing blood, speed, experience, and surprise were typically the deciding factors in who survived and who died. In most cases, the shinobi who had even a slight advantage in one of the two areas emerged victorious. Shinobi battles rarely lasted longer than 2 minutes. Naruto already knew that his new opponent had defeated him by a significant margin in the first two categories, and since he had been studying the blonde's battles, he was probably not going to be shocked either, so the blonde should be dead in the water in the next few seconds. He was going to exert every effort to surpass that typical time limit. The blonde took a deep breath and started to pay attention to everything around him. All of the training he had received with the Sandaime Hokage started to seep into him, and all of the experiences he had faced up to this point were brought to the fore. His arms and legs ached, but he was still alive, which meant he was still fighting. The blonde Jinchuriki had ducked long before the bone projectiles had reached his position, throwing 2 handfuls of shuriken in one motion to form a single seal, and the 6 projectiles had grown to 60 as they rushed to confront his assailant. His sensitive ears twinged as something whistled through the air towards him. The blonde rushed through another set of seals without waiting to see what would happen next. The genin had completed his follow-up-wind ninjutsu by the time the Auto Shinobi had cleared the wall and saw a wave of metal crashing down on him. Daitopa, Futen, wind release, outstanding innovation. The elite Auto Shinobi body flickered out of the path and farther down the street with a sigh of frustration as the wall of metal stars accelerated with the force of the wind ninjutsu. The Kaguya tilted his head to the side to avoid a jump kick, then he lashed out his opposite arm behind him and dispelled it much the same way. With a wave of his arm, a single ulna passed through his skin and slammed into one of the incoming clones, which had already slipped into range as it exploded in a cloud of smoke. The Kaguya watched as fracture marks appeared on the blonde's arm before the unique armor he had been wearing simply seemed to disperse as if it had never existed in the first place. His green eyes scanned the area before he took a big step back. The blonde erupted from the ground where he had just been. The sound shinobi rocked back onto his heels before he suddenly lashed 1 foot forward. The blonde was again caught square in the chest and bodily hurled backwards. As he got closer to the down genin, the man shook his head and said, "Your technique is still in its infancy. You don't have the seasoning to make it especially hard, or the control to keep it active. You are simply outmatched," he said, raising one arm and drawing out another bone. "Like sword. You don't have much of a chance against someone with the strength and knowledge like myself." When his opponent surprised him for the first time, the Kaguya ninja continued on his path towards the blonde, determined to put an end to the fight once and for all. The blonde did not respond, instead lying on the ground panting. Naruto sat up on his elbows as his late trap had finally been sprung, and Kimimaro blinked as 2 sets of hands reached out from the ground on either side of him, each grabbing onto his ankles before he looked down and returned his focus to the original. When the blonde snorted, the Kaguya raised the bone sword, ready to stab downward, and sighed, "This will not help you." "I guess it won't, yeah. However, an elderly man I know once claimed that I was superior to most at one thing." The blonde responded with a smirk, sensing. Before a shrill screaming filled the air, the Auto Shinobi had only managed to frown as he considered the question. Something was behind him, something large, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as the sensation of raw chakra passed over him. "Hello there. Do you want to leave my genin alone?" Hitaki Kakashi squinted at the man on the other side of the street. His normally slack and reckless expression had changed to one of intense focus beneath his mask. His signature technique had just missed an opponent. An adversary who had been restrained by the ankles. That simply did not occur. It shouldn't occur. Unfortunately, it did, and his Sharingan eye caught the whole thing as if it were a single, big, screen film. The man used the opportunity to look down at his right side, ignoring the now bleeding gash he had sustained above his right eyebrow. The final, and seemingly most elusive, member of his genin team was forcing himself to stand up from his previous position, which was sprawled upon his back. The copy ninja scanned Uzumaki Naruto with seasoned ease, observing the shift in posture and clothing in a single motion. Naturally, the genin who had undergone the most transformation over the previous 2 months now knelt before him. To be honest, it was a bit scary. The copy ninja reviewed what had just transpired while calmly turning to face the man. He could see that Naruto had anticipated his arrival and had set up his introduction with that small clone trap he had attempted. And it ought to have been successful. But all of that had changed because of something. Something that, in the process, almost sliced off his head. Nevertheless, catching the big gash that had been exposed on the sound shinobi's side was more than a little satisfying. "Are you alright?" he asked, obviously addressing the genin beside him. Naruto looked at the 2 other leaf shinobi who had arrived with his now former Chunin sensei and got up entirely from his kneeling position. He didn't think the man would be aware of that. He patted his clothes down and looked at the other 2 genin critically before responding angrily, "As good as I'm going to get on this day." They were watching him anxiously. He had no idea why. Apart from the getting my ass handed to me by this guy that is. The Chunin watched the other man like a hawk and made a noise of approval. Neither words nor movement were heard. The other appeared to be calmly observing him nonetheless. Whatever they had been saying to each other seemed to have no bearing on them. The typically cool leaf ninja was irritated by that degree of conceit. It was also a sign of confidence. He didn't think it was lost. With his own eyes fixed on the sound ninja, Naruto stepped closer and asked, "What the hell was that anyway? All that noise and light? I thought you were just going to slit his throat or something." Kakashi shook his head momentarily. He clenched his jaw at the mere thought, saying, "Not necessarily safe enough. To use a kunai like that would require me getting even closer than I did. That was my trump card. An instant kill that's supposed to be able to rip through nearly any defense and blow a hole into a person's chest. You've seen its work before." At the words, the blonde fell silent. Yes, he had previously witnessed the outcomes. His eyes flashed to a picture of the young man they had met on their first foray outside the village walls. In the end, the renegade Kiri shinobi was too benevolent. As he took life after life without hesitation, it served as a reminder that he had used a lot of that day. Yes, that jutsu was vicious. Kakashi gave the genin another glance and drew lead, "Speaking of which, what's with your little trick?" The blonde instantly replied, "It's my trump card." His typically gregarious genin did not immediately seize the opportunity to brag about a new skill, and Kakashi had to force himself not to gape in surprise when he said, "A little special thing I found I could do during training." Maybe he was actually learning something. Was this what Jiraiya had done? In any case, that kind of thinking was not appropriate at this moment. He turned back to the sound ninja who was still standing still and asked, "So, what's this guy's story?" In particular, he almost took his head off without moving. How'd he do what he did? As the two other genin moved to stand beside him, the blonde snorted. "It's a kekkei genkei, a lost one. Comes from a mist clan named Kaguya." As the Chunin took in what had just been said to him, his eyes widened. "A Kaguya?" he questioned incredulously. "I thought they were all dead." With his own sardonic lazy drawl, the blonde retorted, "Like the Uzumaki, Uchiha, or Ice using Yuki." The first of the other genin then said, "Bone Guy was pretty damn proud of his clan name." The typically brazen heiress of the Yamanaka clan clutched her kunai and said, "Bone Guy?" After giving the girl a quick glance, Naruto grunted in agreement. Helpfully, Kakashi interrupted, "The Shikatsumiku, corpse bone pulse." With a wise nod, Naruto yelled, "That's it. I couldn't get a good hit on him, but I sure felt the one he put on me. Nearly snapped me in half. And he's able to just go around shooting them out and stuff." He was grinning. "This guy is good. Really good." Said he was one of Snake Guy's best, and I don't doubt it for a second. When the man across from him finally moved, the Chunin muttered, "Is that so?" He looked at each leaf group in turn, his head tilted in question. In an effort to combat the onset of cramps and muscle stiffness, Naruto rolled his shoulders and added, "Also said pale face wanted me dead. The second guy who's come after me spouting that crap." With much greater vigor, the Chunin repeated, "Is that so?" Something ignited inside him, and his jaw went rigid once more. "Orochimaru put a hit out on you?" The genin shrugged, which surprised me. Naruto deadpanned, "What can I say? He's afraid of awesome." "I'm sure." The Chunin was fuming inside. The Chunin sensei in him was horrified, even though the soldier in him could comprehend it. That someone would voluntarily target one of his genin appalled him. "I'll be sure to tell him what I think after I finish with our friend here." Once more, the blonde shrugged. Although his typical response would be to angrily declare that he would finish his own fight, he was unable to muster the strength to do so at this time. "Fine with me. Not looking to fight him any more than I already have." He was outmatched, exhausted, and hungry. This one was better left to the Chunin. "That's good, because you've got another assignment." Naruto blinked. "I'm sorry," Kakashi went on. "You'll go with Ino and Choji here, and find the rest of the genin. Find Sasuke and bring him back." For a total of 30 seconds, there was silence. "Bring Sasuke back," Naruto said again, without emotion. "Bring Sasuke back?" The Chunin answered, "Yes. From the forest, where he chased after Gaara of the desert." "Ah." The blonde gave another wise nod. "So basically we're all gonna die?" Before his words truly took hold, the Chunin looked at him once more and gave him a serious look. "You know, who told you?" "According to the blonde, I found out, and you were going to send us after him without telling us?" The Chunin made a feeble defense, saying, "I didn't think it'd be a problem." It took Naruto a moment to believe it. "You're usually up for this kind of thing." The reply from Naruto was, "I usually have a bowl of ramen at this time of day. Today isn't the usual, wouldn't you agree?" With obvious bewilderment, the two genin of Squad 10 glanced between the two. As if that brief segment had never occurred, the Chunin went on, "At any rate I want all of you genin to stick together. It's better for all of you. We can't watch you all day if you intend to survive." The blonde gave a snort. "Apart from this guy I've been surviving all day. Not sure how joining up with other genin are going to help. We don't know each other's strengths too well. All of us together may create problems." The Chunin gave a shrug. "It's the best we've got right now. Got to make do with a crisis situation." The genin eyed the Auto Shinobi and said, "If you say so. I still don't see how this will work though. Crap." In response, the Chunin made the kind of fluid motions that only experience could produce. He quickly palmed a kunai and ducked into a spin, avoiding a blow to the neck entirely. He turned and rose again in a single motion, clanging against the white sword. Like bone before getting up on one foot and slamming the opposing heel into his opponent's stomach. With a grunt from the impact, the Kaguya raised one hand and barred down on the copy ninja with the other. Struggling to support the weight of the taller shinobi, the leaf Chunin twitched his head away from the firing fingerbones. Then Naruto was on top of him, his last kunai falling out of his grasp. The sound ninja quickly withdrew from his attack, knocked the bladed weapon aside with his own, and spun on one foot to meet the approaching blonde. In contrast, Naruto was prepared for the counter and, as his hands flashed through seals, he fell to his knees in a slide past a lashing foot. The blonde directed some of his chakra into his hands and down the length of his arms as he turned his palms toward the opposing shinobi. Before the unprepared sound ninja could plant his second foot, the double-barreled wind ninjutsu struck his stomach. He slid back several feet from the force of the ninjutsu and grimaced as the pain of the wind. Natured chakra started to set in, but only the sheer density of his bones prevented him from being swept away through the air. Before he let out a frustrated sigh, he looked down at what was left of his clothes. The blonde got back up and hopped back to join Kakashi and the other two leaf genin, who blanched. When his blonde genin finally settled down next to him, the Chunin dropped his arm and looked. Naruto gasped with effort from the unexpected fight and flinched as his body began to feel the effects of exhaustion. With a tone of surprise, Kakashi began, good job. Really good job actually. Before answering, the blonde genin grunted, like I said, afraid of awesome. Before turning back to the sound shinobi in time to see his next move, the Chunin gave him one final glance. A sharp surge of chakra filled the air, causing his eyes to widen and his breath to catch. Strange markings started to creep across the Kaguya's body, and the four-leaf ninja watched as his chakra rose along with them. Although Kakashi had previously seen something similar, it was far less sophisticated than this. As the vile chakra started to adhere to his skin, Naruto asked, "What the hell is that?" With its sickening sensation, it caused his face to flush and his hand to clench into a fist. Something seemed to have slithered up and perished inside the man. In a whisper that only the blonde's perceptive ears had been able to hear, Kakashi replied, "A cursed seal. Otherwise known as not good." Yes. Years understatement. As he watched the markings spread farther, the blonde thought. Suddenly, the Chunin barked, "Listen up." He chose to get right to the point, ignoring the two genin of Team 10's startled jump. "It's time for you three to get out of here. This guy is way out of your league and I can't fight him while having to watch for you three." After giving him a quick glance, Naruto nodded. "Right, going after Sasuke. Good. Now get out of here before he makes a move again." Without wasting any more time on words, the three genin started walking in the direction of the stadium. Instead of turning to face them, the copy ninja continued to focus on the sound ninja, waiting for a clue as to what the blonde had been saying earlier. He didn't have to wait long. The sound shinobi had cut the gap between the fleeing genin in half in a single body flicker before he had to halt when an arc of pure lightning chakra struck the ground in front of him. As soon as he saw the leaf Chunin approaching, he turned and swung again, this time avoiding Kakashi with ease. A plume of flame erupted from the hailed leaf ninja, preceded only by a flash of hand seals that were almost too quick for the sound shinobi to follow. Before he disintegrated to put distance between them, the leaf Chunin observed as the fire engulfed the sound shinobi. Kakashi allowed him to go and watched as the flames subsided, revealing that his opponent had suffered little to no harm. He winced. Some guy like that. The sound shinobi's once cool and collected expression had changed to one of frustration as the remaining flames subsided. He tore away what was left of the clothing on his upper body, his green eyes glaring at the copy ninja. The words were barely a snarl as they passed his lips. "Hitaki Kakashi. The copy ninja. You are in my way." The Chunin twirled his kunai by the ring and replied, "Yeah. Not sorry about that at all. You are attacking my genin again after all." The glare narrowed even more, green-eyed. "He is to die by the order of Lord Orochimaru. You will not prevent it." Kakashi's own eyes narrow as he says, "So you say. But seeing as you won't be getting past me, I'd have to disagree." The Kaguya gave a frustrated tisk. "No matter. I will simply kill you before hunting him down like the trash that he is." The Chunin rolled his own eyes and said, "Right. That's something I'd like to see. And indeed you will. For after I bring your body before him Orochimaru, Sama is sure to give me great praise." Are we really going to leave him back there? The realization that the girl had spoken to Naruto was delayed by 5 seconds. He glanced at his two fellow leaf genin, turning his head slightly back towards his right shoulder. There was a frown on his face. As the group darted between alleys and back streets in an attempt to avoid confrontations, he responded, "Of course." Naruto had neither the energy nor the skill to defend them from enemies. The attractive girl's face split into a frown, but that guy was really creepy. The word made Naruto want to roll his eyes, but he forced himself not to. He'll be fine. He's a famous ninja from the last war. By the time he was our age, he had been a Chunin for several years. And at 14 he was a Chunin leading groups on important missions in war time. Team 10's two genin glanced at one another, blinked, and then turned back to his back. Really? Their disbelief was evident in their voice. They had a hard time seeing it. He hadn't done anything to particularly impress them, despite the fact that they had recently traveled extensively with him as their unofficial bodyguard. He had just used kunai to kill the other ninjas in his path, aside from the final ninjutsu he had used to try to get rid of the odd sound ninja. They had only seen the man once before, during the preliminary stages of the final Chunin exam. After that, he had just read porn while standing by the railing. Was that man truly that significant? This time, Naruto snorted because he couldn't control his body's natural reaction. He graduated with your own Chunin from the academy as the Rookie of the Year when he was 6. They were all 10. They all look up to him for a reason. He's got huge bounties in the other major villages and a nickname that's pretty popular. Overall, he's one of the strongest ninja in the village, and on top of that is the last, and prized, student of the 4th Hokage. We rather have him fighting someone like that as opposed to other Chunin. He'll be more than fine. As they took in everything he had said, the two other genin turned to face one another again, their eyes wide. Was that infamously lazy and seemingly heartless shinobi really that strong? The Akamichi boy could not comprehend it. As he tried to keep up with the quick pace the other boy was setting, he said, are you sure you have the right guy? After giving the bigger boy a quick glance over his left shoulder, Naruto shook his head and resumed looking around. They glanced at one another again before going silent and trailing the shorter genin. The three of them moved quickly and soundlessly through the streets, somehow avoiding any enemy encounters along the way. Since Naruto was too exhausted to search for pointless fights and the other two weren't sure if they could manage their own if they had to, none of them really voiced any complaints. Before long, all three had sneaked back into the attack's first area before moving sequentially into the arena. They ran into the stands and through the halls. With caution, Naruto looked around, but he could see that most of the fighting in this area had already been finished. There were still only a few battles going on, and none of the fighters broke off to confront them. Before they left and entered the forest that surrounded the village, the three Leaf Genin leapt down onto the arena floor. Naruto held his position by moving into the canopy and keeping an eye out for any potential enemies. As their eyes scanned the foliage for any indication of their potential companions, they darted about. The Akamichi Genin yelled, "They're out of nowhere." Naruto glanced around the area before turning his head in the direction the genin had indicated with a finger. It turned out that a branch had been broken in a way that was too intentional to have been the result of a prior conflict. As he modified his trajectory and the two others turned to match, Naruto remarked, "Good eye." Soon, visible kunai slashes took the place of the branches slide breaking. As they hurried down the path to find their fellow Leaf Genin, the three fell silent once more. Soon after, Naruto's attention was drawn to something else, and his keen eyes focused on the scene in front of him as his somewhat sensitive nose twitched in response to an offensive odor. He had recognized poison instantly. A battle must have taken place here. Just seconds later, he was reassured of this when he noticed an out of color blob. The long sleeves and high collar of the gray coat immediately reminded me of someone. Just a few seconds later, the Akamichi boy cemented the concept. The large, boned genin yelled, "Shino," as he hurried past him to the down boy, closely followed by his female teammate. With a groan, Naruto fought the impulse to palm his face. Just 2 months prior, he would have also hurried forward without inspecting the area, but the Sandaime Hokage swiftly corrected that error in his response. Before descending to the branch they had rested on, he took the opportunity to pause and look around once for any lingering adversaries. The blonde's ears had detected the rasping breathing before he had come within 5 steps of the downed genin. As the two other members of his makeshift team watched the normally quiet boy with concern, he crouched down next to them. His clothes were wet with switch, and his skin was palm. The blonde only needed 3 seconds to realize that the other genin had participated in the fight and had been killed by whatever poison he had previously smelled. The Aburame genin appeared to be curling into a ball and was twitching periodically. Without their host to lead them, the notorious Kekkei beetles scrambled around on the big branch all around him. As the two genin from Squad 10 fussed over their fallen classmate, Naruto watched. Naruto scowled as his thoughts whirled. During their academy years, Aburame Shino had never been one to actively agitate the blonde, even though he had never been friends with him. In contrast to others, he did not minimize the boy or mock his ambitions, and that was more than sufficient in this village. In a way, the casual disregard for his actions was refreshing because Naruto had become so accustomed to the hostility of the populace. Now, however, none of that mattered. He currently didn't know how to recognize the kind of poison, much less how to obtain the counteragent. Furthermore, if it was even lethal, it was impossible to predict how long the boy would be alive before it killed him. Naruto could do nothing to save the dying boy. You must still try, though. He heard something. Those who abandon their fellows are as bad as garbage. Naruto reluctantly concurred. Deep down, he was still the same person despite his more pessimistic outlook on the world. He therefore detested seeing others suffer, particularly those from the Leaf Village. Even though he detested the way things had turned out for him in general, there was no point in making someone else bear the consequences for something that wasn't really their fault. At the very least, he needed to try to get him some assistance. However, he had also been instructed to locate the other genin. What if the person who poisoned him had just moved on like everyone else? Could he really turn around and save the life of one genin at the possible expense of the others? A difficult choice to make, but he had to make one anyhow. He suddenly recalled the reason he had bothered to get out of bed this morning. The reason he had been training so hard for the past few months that he had almost broken his body. Just hours ago, he had been set to become Chunin, the first step toward disproving everyone who had ever questioned him. As squad leaders, Chunin had to constantly make tough choices that could mean the difference between life and death. He had no reason to try to become a shinobi if he couldn't accomplish that. Ultimately, it all boiled down to a straightforward query that he had been asking himself more and more recently: how would Haku respond? The solution was straightforward. Naruto yelled, "Choji, pick him up," with a level of authority he was unaware he possessed. As they processed what he had said, the two other genin gazed up at him in astonishment. Their wide eyes and gaping mouths made him feel irritated from the bottom of his heart. His hands stared at him and he clenched them. Enough gawking, damn it. Pick him up. Astonished by the severe command, the other male genin leapt to his feet and swiftly snatched the fallen Leaf shinobi. Leaning forward, he quickly lifted the taller but lighter boy and laid him on his back, holding onto his forearms to prevent him from sliding off. After observing him at work, Naruto nodded and looked at the Yamanaka girl. As fast as he could, he informed the girl, "Choji will have to carry him, which means he won't be able to fight, so you'll have to cover for both of them. His life is in Choji's hands now. And you have to watch after the both of them. If something happens to either of them, it's on your head." If at all possible, the girl's mouth widened even more, and she hurried to her feet before stepping back. She started to stutter out a denial and shake her head violently. He spoke to her before she had a chance to say anything. He declared resolutely, "There is no debating this." With the deadliest tone he could manage, he said, "If you do not do it, Aburame Shino will die." It was impressive given his usually loud, animated, and emotionally charged voice. As her teammate moved to stand beside her, the girl fell silent and snapped her mouth shut. After giving them both a quick glance, Naruto nodded and made the well-known seal. Before it stood and approached them, a lone shadow clone appeared beside him in a crouch. "This is all the help I can give you. I'll need what chakra I do have left to help out anyone else. For all we know, someone attacked the rest of the genin and is just waiting in the area for someone else to show up. Which means you'll have to get out of here as fast as you can." The other two genin nodded in comprehension as they gazed at him with wide eyes. Before he looked around and scowled, the genin said, "Good, go straight for some medical help. Ask who you have to, but find someone to save his life. He's counting on you both. Now go." Contrary to what he initially thought, there was no waste of time. With their passenger in tow, the two genin immediately turned around and headed toward the village. Naruto observed them until they were no longer visible, at which point he inhaled deeply and turned back toward his initial course. The blonde sighed, leaned back, and dropped from the big branch just in time to escape the Senbon wave. With a series of thunks, they crashed into the wood where he had been, and Naruto could smell the poison they were covered in right away. As his assailant descended from the canopy above to rest on a tree nearby, the blonde used chakra to catch himself against the next branch down the tree and snapped his blue eyes upward. It was one of the three previous sound genin. He was humiliated by the puppeteer in front of the third's grandson. He appeared unsteady on his feet and was more than a little worse for wear. Blood was visible on his oddly painted face, and his odd clothes were torn in several places. As he had been doing all day, the blonde had figured out what had happened in roughly 10 seconds. He's worn out. That technique requires a lot of control, but if the fight goes on for a long time, it can quickly deplete chakra. He shouldn't be that poor, though. Something clicked in his mind. He was defeated. The blonde grinned as she realized. He was beaten by Shino. He can hardly stand because his bugs almost drained the bastard dry, but they were unable to complete the task because the poison started to set in. He must have simply been attempting to hide away and rest up here when we got there. When we arrived, he would have been contemplating whether or not to come out. He listened to our strategy and attempted to intervene. A part of the blonde was angry that he had attempted to attack the Suna genin before he had been able to capture his hide or hair. However, preparation was the other component. Before he could assist the other genin, he would need to complete this battle as soon as possible. The question of how he would get rid of the other boy would then come up. He is the son of the Case Cage. Naruto remembered what the Toad Sage had said. Every member of the Suna Genin team is a child of their own cage. Therefore, if I can avoid it, I should probably avoid killing him. Although the Genin was by no means a politician, he was already aware that killing a cage's child might cause backlash. Even though he detested Suna at the moment, primarily for trying to murder him all day, he recognized that some civility would be required. He was certain that saving the cage's son's life would look good on the resume, but he had no idea what the higher dot-ups would do after this day. That was for much later, though. It was time to get to work. As he worked out his strategy, Naruto grinned cheekily and remarked, "Y'all looking a little shaky there. Maybe you should lay down." He was sneered at by the Sand Genin. "You'll be the one laying down when I'm done with you, brat." Naruto rolled his eyes visibly. He gave an exaggerated show clap to express his opinion, saying, "Bravo, you really had a great comeback there. Really burned me good there, buddy. By the way, you sure you want to go down this road?" Somehow, the sneer was able to penetrate further. Enough with the talk. The Genin lifted his hands and twitched his fingers, and Naruto stiffened. The blonde responded, as he always did, by leaning backward of the branch when his sensitive ears detected the sound of something shooting through the air towards him. But he stayed attached and just swung his body to the underside rather than just dropping to another branch below. Before he extended his hands in the direction of the Sand Genin, the blonde, hanging upside down, flashed through a set of seals. Futen. Daitopa, Great Breakthrough, Wind Release. As it raced upward toward the other Genin, the huge gust of wind tore through the tree tops. The oldest son of the cage cursed and jumped backward off his branch to try to dodge the wind ninjutsu. Hunched over, he landed on the next branch, dropped to his knees, and then jerked his head upward. Naruto was on him already. The blonde's right hook whirled him around in a full circle with such force that it almost rattled his brain. After a left to the stomach that threw him forward and sent spittle flying, Naruto completed the little combo with a right knee that snapped the opponent's head back in a leg sweep that ultimately landed him flat on his back in a spread eagle. Before he burst out laughing, the blonde glanced down at his opponent with black hair. He put his hands on his hips and remarked, "Damn, that was easy." The finger of the Suna Genin twitched. Looking down, Naruto saw the blade piercing his chest. The Toad Sage gazed in utter disbelief at what he saw. With the most composed smile he could manage, the Sandaime Hokage turned to face the man outside the barrier. On his wrinkly face, it was completely hollow even now. He said, "Ah, Jiraiya," as though it were a typical day. "Don't be so shy. Step closer and say hello to these two old fellows." As a result, the Sannin allowed his feet to propel him ahead, only to halt in front of the wall of purple flames dividing the elderly Hokage from the outside world. Jiraiya turned his attention to the inside of the barrier, ignoring the snarling face of the strange sound ninja that stood in front of him. He had never imagined that he would ever have the pleasure of meeting two men, but they stood tall and proud. The Hokages of Nidaime and Shodai. This very village was founded with the assistance of the renowned Senju brothers, who also significantly altered the shinobi world at large. These two were, in fact, among the most well-liked and formidable shinobi in history. Two shinobi who were very dead. Gazing at the improvised battlefield that filled a building's whole roof, the sage was at a loss for words. In front of three former Leaf Legends, two of whom had been dead for decades, stood his elderly sensei, clad in the renowned black armor he had worn as a young man. Orochimaru scoffed at him from his spot next to the big pillars that protruded from the roof, which Jiraiya soon recognized as coffins. It was pinned shut by three shuriken in the third. It was easy to determine for whom it was intended. From deep within the Toad Sage, rage akin to what he had never truly experienced started to surface. In a savage, silent snarl, Jiraiya's mouth opened wide to reveal his teeth. He clenched his big, meaty fist, trying to keep his cool. He was rapidly losing the battle. It was all he could do. What the hell? With black eyes that he was certain they didn't have in their natural lives, the two deceased Hokage turned to face him. After observing him with interest, they turned to face the third fire shadow once more. The person with the long brown hair asked, "And who might this be, Hiruzen? I don't recognize him." Before the Sandaime could respond, his counterpart said, "I do. This is another one of his students, the second one." "Oh." The voice had a tinge of interest. "Another student, Hiruzen? Did you take a whole team?" The elderly Hokage laughed heartily. In response, he nodded his head. "Indeed I did. This is Jiraiya-kun. Another one of my students. The one I'm most proud of." The Shodai turned his head back to the sage and said, "I see. Well then, how do you do?" Before he could come up with a response of his own, Jiraiya blinked at being addressed so abruptly. Fine sir." For a brief moment, The bizarre encounter almost sapped his rage. It only came back twice as angry. All he could think of in this situation was, actually I'm not fine. I come up here to find my old teammate has trapped our sensei inside of a barrier and is attempting to kill him by summoning you too. With a grunt, the second Hokage confirmed his suspicion. My own ninjutsu. Edo, Tensai. The first abruptly turned his focus to his younger sibling. You went through with that disgusting technique. His calm attitude toward Jiraiya was abruptly replaced by anger. The Nidaime turned his gaze casually to his brother, showing no signs of concern. The man defended apathetically, I made it to protect the village. It was supposed to be a kinjutsu that was to be used as a last resort. If the village was to be destroyed by an enemy force, I intended for the user to bring in a measure of help. A good load that's done. We're about to be used against the village now. He raised his eyebrows, it's a vile creation, brother. The snake Sanin caught everyone's attention. Enough of this squabbling, each person said. His yellow eyes were slitted like the snakes he aimed to imitate, and his pale face was drawn back in a snarl. With regret, the first Hokage shook his head. The wood element master smirked and said, you're a rude one. I know little Saru didn't teach you to act like that. He himself was never one for such harsh words. The words caused the snake summoner to blink, and then he frowned. Before carefully inserting them into the fabled leaf leaders, Jiraiya observed him raise two kunai with tags fastened to the ring. Before their bodies abruptly seized up to full height, the two men sagged forward. He knew what he needed to know because the two stopped talking and their expressions showed no emotion at all. The former Hokage had been reduced to mere puppets by Orochimaru. Despite the imminent threat of death posed by the barrier in front of him, Jiraiya felt his hand rising against his will as the rage somehow tripled. When his old sensei's yelling voice said, Jiraiya, his fist went cold, saving his hand. After blinking, the man's gaze shifted to the elderly man. Across from his own two teachers, the Hokage stood composedly with his arms folded, not even turning to face him. Get rid of the rest of the snake summons in the village and then set out to find the Sand Jinchuriki. They were directives. It had been so long since he had actual orders. The man furrowed his brow. If he could, he would say, Sensei, I came here to bring down this barrier. He would have to study it for a while before figuring out the best defenses. They were truly short on time. The Sandaime were aware of something. Jiraiya found it difficult to recall a time when his sensei had spoken so strongly about a potential adversary. I'll deal with it after I remove Orochimaru's head. What he thought of Orochimaru was now obvious. Unlike the previous time, there would be no mercy. The words didn't seem to scare the snake Sanin. His equally repulsive chuckle echoed through the air like a bird's song on a clear spring morning, and his now famous and slimy smirk slid across his face. You seem so confident, Sarutobi. Sensei. Jiraiya's upper lip curled at the hint of mockery in his voice. You can still count, right? Or have you gone so senile that you can't recognize that you're outnumbered 3-1? In return, the third fire shadow sneered. You mean 2-1? I don't recognize you as a real threat, child. The words were able to penetrate the pale man's skin. His yellow eyes widened, and then he gave a menacing hiss. Ignoring his own mistake the second before, Jiraiya snorted at the man's lack of self-control. Orochimaru had always been easily lured in by the old man's few words. The old Hokage only got one warning before his two former teachers acted. We'll see what you think about that soon, old fool, was the snarl. Prior to that, the elderly man was halfway through a set of seals when he leaned over and slammed his palms against the roof. Before turning his head away and jumping clear of the rooftop, Jiraiya saw the temporary battleground they were on change in a matter of seconds. Jiraiya could see the doubt in the old leader's eyes despite the assurance he had expressed. Sarutobi Hiruzen's final battle was probably this one. Farewell, Sensei. As he descended into the village below and headed for the closest snake wreaking havoc, he thought. Following the old man's final instructions would be the least he could do. However, if Orochimaru had survived by the time he returned, no god would be strong enough to prevent him. Staring down at the blade that had almost cut him in two, blue eyes blinked. As the puppet that had passed through him moved closer to drive the blade deeper, he heard the rattling of wood behind him. The blonde looked down the length of his body as the Sand Genin raised his head. A ferocious smile with blood-stained teeth widened. You could see the triumph in his eyes. You were saying garbage? The blonde wondered if the note of insanity in his eyes had come from the parents. I couldn't quite hear you the last time. The blue eyes lifted to his. The blonde started to rattle around the weapon. I said that this was completely like a snake dragging its belly across the floor. The whisper moved forward into his ear and said, too easy. cords of ninja wire wrapped around the Sand Genin's throat before his eyes had had time to widen in shock. The clone in which his puppet had been embedded vanished as his hands jerked up and the puppet fell from the branch. Standing on the underside of the branch, Naruto leaned back and exerted more force on the wire that was encircling his gloved hands. The sharp thread sliced deeper into the Kaguya's son's windpipe, causing him to cough. As he clawed at the wire suffocating him, his chest heaved and his vision became blurry. He tried to gain leverage by kicking feet, but he was never able to get a firm grip. And then it was over. The boy took a deep breath, and the pressure abruptly subsided, before his vision was suddenly filled with a fist that the blonde slammed into his face once, twice, and 3 times before a crack indicated a broken nose. He was able to blink once. After a quick look around, Naruto stood up and rubbed the middle part of his chest where the blade's phantom pains were still present. Making a clone that could survive as long as it did had required more chakra than he had wanted to expend, but he was powerless to stop it. Since the puppet was expertly concealed in the trees above them, he had to give the Sound Genin credit. The blonde had to use a decoy to lure it out because she had no way of knowing where it was. The blonde reared back and then planted a foot in the older boy's stomach, and the pain was still unbearable. Naruto glared and remarked, "You're lucky to be the son of a cage, or else I'd slam a kunai into your fucking skull." All the Sand Genin could do was cough up a splatter of blood that trickled from his mouth. Before shaking his head at the pitiful scene, Naruto glanced down at the battered Genin. Too vicious for his own good, this bastard. The blonde Genin started, "Normally, I would follow up on anything you know. But I'm sure you're just a little punk who couldn't keep up. Which means the others have gone ahead and your siblings left you behind. Which also means you're not important enough to keep track of." Reaching down, he caught the coughing boy's chin, then jerked it upright and brought their eyes together. "Run away, bitch." An intense rage suddenly takes hold. Run away like the coward you are. Run like the little bastard who left his brother all alone because he was too scared of him to try and be a proper brother. And when you get back to your shithole of a village, tell everyone there that despite all the surprise attacks and sneak tactics, you and your merry band of fuck-ups still got your asses handed to you. The blonde then vanished, running ahead into the trees in the direction indicated by the markings. He left another shattered body in his wake. His body had been exhausted from the long day, but he could sense that it was all coming to an end. Nothing would prevent him from getting some much needed rest after this. Nara Shikamaru tried, unsuccessfully, to maintain his shadow possession technique while gritting his teeth and falling to one knee. Pulling against the ninjutsu's stifling effects, the human half thing that had once been the Sand's prized Genin roared with savage aggression. The heir to the Nara clan, exhausted and almost breathless, turned to his only backup in the region. The only one of them with combat experience was the Uchiha clan prodigy he had been sent to assist, and he was already near death. The dark-haired boy was leaning his back against a tree trunk, trying to catch his breath by closing his eyes and panting heavily. His green-eyed teammate stood next to him, watching anxiously as she attempted to keep him upright by placing a hand on his shoulder. The only Genin who wasn't in their graduating class and had been assigned to this task was standing across from them. The girl with the brown hair had long since run out of steam and was now resting one knee in the same position as him. With wild but determined eyes, she eyed their collective enemy warily while holding a dual-sided kunai with an elongated handle in each hand. Overall, things weren't looking very good. And everything worsened in an instant. Without any real warning, a wave of dark and repulsive chakra swept across the collective area, stopping all of the Leaf Genin in their tracks. The Nara heir's control over the enemy's body vanished in an instant, and the creature flashed forward, turning its half-sand head toward him. Long before he realized what was happening, the normally slothful boy was in motion. As the monster charged into the area he had just been occupying, he leapt from his tree and onto the next. Before leaping off in the direction of another tree, the Genin landed with a thud on another nearby branch without bothering to turn around. He was informed by a loud boom behind him that the monster Genin was in fact pursuing him, and the boy experienced a surge of fear unlike anything he had ever experienced before. He noticed movement out of the corner of his eye, and the boy had just managed to avoid a hailstorm of metal stars by dropping down onto another branch below. The boy genius knew that the weapon-centric Kunichi's attack had struck home after hearing a growl of frustration and several hollow impacts. However, he was aware that it would all be in vain. Like water flowing off an umbrella's surface, this monster appeared to simply shrug off their combined attacks. It appeared to have no chakra boundaries and required no rest. In short, it was an unstoppable beast. It was rushing toward them. Fantastic. As he landed on another branch, the boy pondered and at last turned his head to look behind him. Panic ensued as he forced himself to fall forward onto his stomach as a wave of sand whipped out overhead with enough force to cut deep into the tree trunk, almost costing him his life in the process. Long before a follow-up attack in the form of 5 projectiles crushed the large tree limb with their combined force, the Nara boy was scurrying forward. The boy landed on a nearby branch after failing to hear his assailant behind him right away. He turned to look back and saw something that almost made his heart stop. A partially formed cocoon of sand held the older leaf genin in midair. The Nara genius was long since unconscious, as evidenced by the tilt of her head and the absence of a struggle. Dead in the water is another name for it. He couldn't help but notice that the monster genin's attention was diverted from its prey to him by the boy's yell. It gave the rapidly approaching boy a savage smile, then withdrew and threw the unconscious girl at him like a baseball. When she slammed into the Nara air with enough force to propel him backward, he was caught mid-jump. He fought to remain conscious for the sake of both of them as the 2 genin crashed into a tree trunk and started to slide down. The monster had already cut their distance in half and was still approaching, so it wouldn't matter at this point. The Nara boy could only watch as the beast landed on a branch above them before swinging down to the underside and launching itself down to meet them like a rocket after the 2 genin fell on a branch farther down the tree. The Nara boy could only watch helplessly as his boy refused to move from its position trapped under the older girl, even though the monster appeared to move in slow motion as it descended upon them. This marked the end of his life. At least the ride has been enjoyable. As his eyes instinctively closed to protect himself from the sight, the boy pondered. It was only a question of time until the madman took his own life. The boy was certain of that. But he was never given the opportunity. Rather, the boy only heard a gust of wind brush across his face before a fierce gust of wind struck the monster in the middle of autumn. The altered Suna genin, caught in midair and without a place to land, could only yell in shock as the winds, which were clearly aided by chakra, tore it from its course and flung it into the nearby forest. The Nara boy slowly opened one eye to try to locate his opponent as the ninjutsu subsided, but his eyes only snapped open completely when he heard a voice from somewhere to his left. With a hint of irritation, it said, "You can get up now. The big bad demon is gone." As his head feebly lolled in the direction to gaze at his savior, the Nara boy laughed. In just a few words, only one person in the world could make such a dire situation seem so absurd. A smile appeared in spite of his situation. Good to see you too, Naruto.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.